Hello and welcome back to Crafted by Corie. If you're new, I'm Corie. Welcome to my channel. If you're returning, thank you as always for being here. I appreciate your support more than I can tell you. Today I have a compilation video. It is the best 23 projects from 2023. So let's go ahead and get right on into the crafting.
DIY number one. All right, I have a bunch of items from the Dollar Tree. This was leftover from a Dollar Tree mop head that I used for another project a while back. This was a baby blanket from the Dollar Tree, also a scrap. I try to keep everything and use what I can. And then this actually is a pom-pom from the Dollar Tree. It was a pack of like a dozen or so. This is not Dollar Tree. This came in a Michael's grab box that I've had it in my stash for a while. Didn't know what to do with it. And this is a mini tree skirt for one of their little mini Christmas trees, and a pair of black fuzzy socks. And then that is just a little wooden bead that I am going to paint with my peaches and cream paint marker. That's what that is. It's an Arteza paint marker. And I set that aside to dry, and now I'm going to work on the baby blanket. In hindsight, I wish that I had made this a little bit wider, but essentially I'm after a rectangular shaped piece of fabric here that I'm going to sew into a cylinder shape. So just trying to get an idea of the size that I'm going after. I don't have a pattern for this. I'm just kind of winging it, but I have a vision in my head as to what I want it to look like. So you can kind of see me thinking as I twiddle my little fingers there, but trying to get it all lined up and even. And in hindsight, again, I wish instead of cutting it this way, I had cut the bottom part off of it, because I ended up making it a little skinnier and too tall. So at any rate, I've got my sewing machine out. I'm just going to run a seam right down the side of the rectangle that I had folded in half, create that cylindrical shape that I mentioned. And now I need a bottom for it also. So I'm trying to think of a circle that is going to be the right size and, well, I was going to say shape, but it's a circle. So I realized that the lid of my Mod Podge was a perfect fit, but then this other little container, which was much easier to work with, was about the same size, actually a little bit larger, which was perfect. So I traced around that with a pen, cut out my circle, and then I was ready to pin it all inside out into my little cylindrical shape here. So I'm just tucking it in there and just trying to get it all lined up so that I can sew this as well. So I'm going to pin this all along that edge, and then I will grab my sewing machine again and just very carefully sew along that little bit. So it's going to be, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing. I've got to figure out my camera angles so that I can be better about showing you exactly what I'm doing. But if you do so, I'm sure you've got an idea of what I'm doing there. So pulled out my pins and I'm ready to flip it right side out. And then my next step was going to be to stuff this. So I grabbed my fiber fill and I did start to try to stuff it, and then realized that I really wanted to anchor it with something first. I wanted something that was going to put some weight in the bottom of it. So I pulled that out. I grabbed some of my glass beads. These are also from the Dollar Tree. Some people will use rice or beans. You can use whatever you have at hand. I just have a ton of these glass beads, and so that is what I opted to use. So I went ahead and stuffed it, and now I'm getting an idea of the shape of my my little body. And Sammy is hanging out with me here and sleeping and dreaming, so I apologize if you could hear him woofing. He's making really funny puppy noises. But at any rate, I went ahead and grabbed a bunch of strands of my mop head and gathered it up. I'd been trying to figure out how I was going to operate that. I opted for a rubber band, as you saw, just to try and keep it all together. And here I'm cutting off the top of that, which is why I was saying I wish that I had cut that original piece of fabric differently than I had. So I think next time I will opt on wider, just so my little gnome ends up being a little bit more rotund than a skinny little thing. But he's still super cute in the end. So just making sure that I've got it stuffed sufficiently and trying to figure out how I want to get this to come together. So I'm going to use a bunch of hot glue here, start to try to form the top of the body. I'm going to tuck that mop head down inside of there as well. And then I did go back in and apply more hot glue all around the base of my mop head, not just on the side that you're going to see me applying glue here. I did it underneath as well because I just want to make sure that this is going to come apart on me. So once I had that all set, I was ready to start on my hat. So I've got my tree skirt there that I'm going to work with, trying to figure out the size of the hat that I need to make. So I'm going to literally just wrap it around there and get a measurement that way. Excuse me. So where my thumb is, that's where I need to cut it. And I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do this, and ultimately decided to do it that way. So I am going to just cut right up along the edge there, and then I'll be flipping that inside out in a second and sewing that up as well. So here I've got it inside out. I will go ahead and pin that so it doesn't slide on me, and I'll grab my sewing machine and just run a seam right along that edge as well, and that's going to create my little hat, turning it right side out and just making sure that it fits on my little gnome. It was a little bit loose, but I would rather be a little loose than too tight. So now I've got my antlers, and I'm trying to figure out where I want them to live on the hat. If you haven't realized yet, I'm making a little reindeer gnome. So I'm going to put a little snip, a little notch right in that fabric there. And this worked out better than I expected. It didn't fray at all. It's, God, I want to call it sizing. I think that's what it's called. I'm not sure. There's some sort of a backing to this that is, I know it's used in sewing, but I don't know what it's called. But it doesn't fray or, yeah, I don't know. It was very easy to work with. Let me put it that way. So I've got it positioned back up on the gnome, and I literally just took the pick part and tucked it down inside in the middle of the mop head piece, and so it was really very stable. It just went right down through the whole body of the gnome, so that was perfect. And now obviously I am stuffing my hat. I want to make sure that it's got enough support, just because those antlers do have a little bit of weight to them, and I don't want them to just be kind of floating there without some additional support, and making sure that the hat is going to keep its shape. So then I started applying the hot glue to the back there that you saw to make sure that it was secured. And now I'm going to pop his little nose in here with some more hot glue. Just get that where it needs to be. Adding a little bit more to the top of the hat. And then I'll add some hot glue to either side of his nose underneath the hat there to get that secured, and just make sure that it's kind of conforming to his little head and wrapping around his nose, as our lovable gnomes tend to do. Just got that all finalized. And now I'm ready to add the little pom-pom to the top of his hat. So added that with some hot glue as well. And then I wanted to make some little feet for him. So I folded over the sock so that I would have kind of a double situation going on there. I'll cut it in half again. And then I did cut one side of the socks as well, because right now I had like 2 tubes. I did cut one out so that I could then sew up 3 sides and have the short side be the open side, which I am filling up with some additional glass beads. These are going to be, I think I said this already, these are going to be his feet. So I want there to be some weight to these as well. And then as you saw, I added some more fiber fill. I sewed up the tops of his little feet, and I'm going to be adhering them to his underside here. So I trimmed off a little bit of the excess sock. I didn't do it at first because I wanted to see how much of it I needed. And once I had a gauge for that, I went ahead and trimmed some of it off, got him positioned the way I wanted him, then added a whole bunch of hot glue that I sat his little hiney down on and got him all situated. I did find that he was a little bit wobbly. He needed a little bit more support under his hindquarters there. So I ended up adding a couple of extra glass beads here. So you see me tucking them kind of in to underneath the fabric area. There was a space for that, and just added some hot glue. And then I'm going to apply some additional sock. So I just cut out another little piece of sock and applied that right over. And because they're fuzzy, it like blends all together, and it looked really, really good actually. And then I decided I wanted to separate all of the strands of the mop head to create a fluffier little beard for this guy. And I gave it a trim along the bottom. Now, in hindsight, he's super cute, but I do wish that I had trimmed his beard up a little bit more, made it look more like a beard, and so that you could maybe see his body more. But I don't know. Let me know what you think. DIY number 2. Okay, this is from the Dollar Tree. It's just a little sign, and I am going to be cutting off the top part of it. Now, it is too wide for my little miter box, my hand saw miter box. So I am going to be using I want to call this a Sharpie, my X-Acto knife. My sharp knife. So as you can see, I'm using my square for my straight edge, and I'm just going to keep scoring this over and over again. These boards are not real thick. It's somewhere between a wood and a really heavy cardboard, I would say. I'm not even sure what it's called, but if you are patient and you just continue to score it over and over again, you will be able to cut through it. You just need to apply a little bit of pressure and just keep scoring it until you make it all the way through. This is if you don't have access to a saw. Obviously, if you have just a saw, it's really, really quick if you have a saw. But that's an option for you if you don't have one. So now I've got my piece that I'm ready to work with, and I'm trying to figure out how I am going to do this. My goal is to put 24 equally spaced holes across the bottom. So I broke out my measuring tape, and then I started using my calculator on my phone, trying to figure out. So I'm like, well, it's just shy of 18 inches divided by 24. And I was like, well, that's not quite right, because, yeah, you guys, I am visual, right? I can do basic math, but this one was really challenging me. I stuck with it for a little while and finally decided that no, I need a visual. So I pulled out some parchment paper and I decided I was going to make myself a template, because I want this to look nice. I want it to be properly done. I just don't always know the means to get there. So if you have a good way to figure out how to put 24 of these little holes, across, how you calculate that, I am all ears. So at first I started creating this template. This is just parchment paper, but I did it longer than the board. And then after doing all my folds and everything else, I realized it needs to be the same size as the board. So I created a new template that was going to be the same length as my board, so that as I create my folds, which I'll explain in a minute, it was going to be within the confines of the board itself. Hopefully I am making sense. So now I started folding it. I folded it in half, and then I started folding it in quarters. I probably, if I'd thought about it, should have done my folds in a different way, because then I realized, well, the halfway mark, because I have 24 holes I'm making, the halfway mark is going to be right smack in the middle of my what would it be, 12th and 13th holes, right? Originally I was thinking each crease would be the center of a hole. Well, no, that's not how this is going to work out. Each hole is going to have to be between the creases. I don't know if I'm making any sense whatsoever, but stick with me because I do finally manage to get it there. I'm just sharing all of this with you so you can see what I was doing, what wasn't working, how I was figuring this out. And again, if you have any suggestions on how I could have done this in an easier way, I am completely open to suggestions. So here I'm just counting up the number of sections that I have, and I had 24 sections. So I realized I was going to have to punch my holes in between my creases. Now I also want to make sure that they are in a straight line. So I decided I was going to go ahead and actually, I guess maybe not yet. I'm not sure what I was doing at this point. Maybe I was, oh, this is where I was thinking about punching my holes. And this is where I realized that I needed some sort of a line to keep everything even and straight. So this is where I'm going to fold up the bottom, and I'm going to fold it up about an inch. And I want to make sure that it's even all the way across because I want my line to be straight. So I am just making sure that I've got my crease going all the way across, 1 inch up, nice and straight, and it's along that crease line that I'm going to be punching my holes for my template, or at least marking it off. So I'm using my little piercing tool from the Dollar Tree, and I had it folded in half because I figured I could do, a couple of them at a time. It was getting a little bit off, so I ended up flipping it over and going through the other side as well, and just making sure that everything was centered along that line in between my other creases. Hopefully I'm making sense. And I know you probably can't see those little holes that I've pierced, but I was able to see it on my work surface. So these were really just guidelines because, again, this is just a pattern really. And I'm going to be getting out my drill in a few minutes, and where I marked those little, I'm going to call them guide holes, that's where I'm going to be drilling. So, and you know what? I am so proud of how this piece turned out. So I hope that you're going to hang in there with me. This is a little bit more involved than some of the things that I normally do. I wouldn't say that it's difficult per se, just more involved, and it took me a little bit more time than a lot of the projects I work on. And after this one, I've got a couple of really easy ones. So just hang in there with me. So now I have a candy cane, and I have all my drill bits, and I'm looking for a drill bit that is slightly larger than my candy cane. I don't want it to be super large, but just it's going to be enough so I can fit my candy cane into the hole. Now I have this up on some pieces of wood. I don't think I showed that, but I want to make sure I'm not going to drill a hole through my table. I did kind of nick my self-healing mat there because I didn't have it quite propped up high enough, but I went and got some more wood and set that underneath the left side. I am probably not doing this in a way that is the safest, so please be safe. Don't necessarily do what I do. I probably should have had this not anchored down. What's the word I want? I don't know. Probably should have been doing it off the side of a table so that, yeah, just be safe when you do this. That's all I can say. I am doing it the way that I need to be able to show you what I'm doing with the camera. So now you can see I've got all of my 24 holes punched here. It did chew up the board a little bit. So I'm just taking my sand block and sanding that down. I was afraid it was going to completely take the finish off of the surface, and surprisingly it did not. There I was just testing to make sure that my candy cane fit through the hole, because that would have been a real bummer if it didn't. And now I'm just taking some fine grit sandpaper and going in around each of the little holes as well. So While it got a little bit chewed up around the edges, it wasn't too bad. And once I get everything cleaned up, I'm going to actually grab some Adirondack white chalk paint and I'm going to dry brush this just to kind of clean up the whole areas and then also brighten it up a little bit, and just make sure that the piece looks coherent. Coherent, is that the right word? Uniform, maybe, I don't know. But I definitely wanted to touch up the area around those holes, so that was the purpose of the dry brushing on this. So once I had that all set, I went over to my Cricut app on my phone and I am just typing up Christmas countdown, and I picked out just a basic cursive font. And then I went ahead and did a whole bunch of numbers 1 through 24, and got those all set. I put them originally in the same font. Y'all, I ended up doing these numbers 3 times, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I've got my little Cricut Joy with the smart vinyl. It's just measuring off the vinyl. I'm telling it to go ahead and start cutting, and it went to work. I love this little machine. It does such a great job, and it's just so quick and easy to use, and it tucks away in my little drawer, and it's awesome. So I cut off the vinyl, then I was cutting out some of the excess vinyl that I wasn't going to need to use because I like to save the scraps for future projects. Then I went ahead and I weeded the numbers first. I wanted to make sure that I applied the numbers to the project first, so that I would then be able to figure out where to put the Christmas countdown as far as from top to bottom goes. So weeded all of that out. And once I had this completely weeded and put it up here, I realized my numbers were going to be too large. They were not going to fit properly, especially when I got into the 20s over my holes. So that was why I redid it. The first time, I basically just made them a lot smaller. And while that was cutting, I went ahead and weeded out my Christmas countdown, got that prepped. I always find this so satisfying. I know some people don't have the patience for it. I know Annie from Indie Annie Jones is always saying she just doesn't have the patience for it, but I actually find weeding relatively satisfying until it becomes like this. So the font that I used, because I made it so small now, I was struggling massively with trying to get this weeded. These, especially the ones in my numbers, they did not want to cooperate. I finally got so fed up with it. I was like, heck with it. I'm going to do it again. But I needed a different font. I needed something that could remain smallish. I mean, not super small. They were probably half an inch tall, I'd guess. But I needed maybe not even half an inch. They might have been a little smaller than that. But I needed something that was going to be chunky enough for me to be able to weed, right? So here comes the third time. Third time's the charm, right? So once that was all set, I went ahead and I weeded it, got it all ready to go, and then I was ready for my transfer tape. So just using my little weeding tool also to help me make sure that I'm poking all the numbers out and that they're laying down. Now, I opted to actually use the vinyl. I also could have used these as a stencil to paint everything onto the board. But like I said, I decided I was just going to use the vinyl letters. I don't know why I wasn't using the transfer tape at first, but there I've got my one on, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing all the way along the length of my board and just apply my numbers in order right above the little holes that I've drilled. So I had originally in that first attempt thought, well, maybe I could get the numbers where I needed them and just put them all down at once. Yeah, I think that would have taken a lot more calculation, because I wasn't really sure what the spacing needed to be for each number in the Cricut app. And yeah, so I was trying to keep it simple. Now I've got my Christmas countdown that is all on my transfer tape. I'm going to burnish that down and then peel that back. And again, I could have used it as a stencil and painted this on. I decided I was just going to use the vinyl itself. And now I'm going to embellish the top of it. So I have these greenery picks, not greenery, evergreen. That's what I wanted to say. These evergreen picks. At first I thought they were going to be too long. So I went ahead and I cut one of them in half. Oh, excuse me. And then I've got my little berries there. And as I was working with this, I realized that with these larger berries, the evergreen definitely needed to be longer. So like I said, I am visual. I have to see things laid out before I 100% commit to them. But I finally got it going to a place that I liked it. And that was when I decided I was good to start going ahead and securing this down. So once I have it somewhat laid out the way that I want it and where I can start kind of seeing it in my mind's eye now, I'm going to go ahead and use some hot glue to pin this down. Not pin it down, but secure it and glue it down. Clearly I fuss a lot when I'm doing these things. Okay, Corie. Enough's enough. Let's go. All right. So here I am going to go ahead and apply some hot glue. Just a nice bit of hot glue there. Putting these down. I did twist these together just to try to keep them a little bit conjoined. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but that was how I opted to do it. And now I'm going to tuck in my berries, but I decided that the picks were a little bit too long, so I trimmed that down because I don't want wires sticking out. I want everything nice and pretty and hidden. So I got the other one prepped. Got that set down. And then I do have some little gold pine cones, these little mini pine cones I'm going to be applying to the middle in a second to cover up that center section. But first I grabbed the other two pieces that I had trimmed and I tucked those in. There was some hot glue in there that kind of grabbed them, but I'm going to be flipping this upside down once I have everything attached and just reinforce it in the back. You'll see that in a minute. So I've got these 3 little pine cones that I'm setting down. I think 2 of them were actually painted gold and then one of them was like gold glitter. So just something to give it a little bit of bling and to add a little bit more gold, like my lettering. So here I'm just coming in and reinforcing the back of it for those 2 little pieces of evergreen that weren't 100% glued down. And just making sure that those are nice and secure. So now I have this cord. I believe this is from Hobby Lobby, if I'm not mistaken. I think I got it like 50% off or something. And I am going to secure it to either side. This is a gold cord that's also a little bit iridescent. It has like greens and reds kind of glimmering through it. It's really very pretty. But just creating a hanger for this. I had added some hot glue as you saw, but then I'm also going to grab a little piece of scrap fabric and I'm going to cut a little rectangle here that I'm going to put down over the hot glue. I've seen other people do this and I just figured it would help secure it a little bit better. I don't know if that actually works or not, but it also is hiding the end of my cord as well. So kind of just cleaning up the back and making it a little bit neater, a little bit more finished. And it blends somewhat with the board itself because it's white on white. And while the board is a little bit distressed, hopefully you guys forgive me for letting this be what is in my mind finished. So once I have that all taken care of, I decided my hanger was a little bit too long, so I'm just going to tie a little knot at the top of this. I kind of twisted it a few times to help make it easier to knot, and that is actually going to create the center of my hanger and give it a little bit more interest even. So as far as I was concerned, it was a happy accident. And that is it. Now I get to put my candy canes in, and I have my little Christmas countdown advent calendar, if you'd like to call it. But just got those all in, and this is all set. I love this so much. I hope that you do too, but let me know what you think of this one. DIY number 3. Right, now I have this little glass bowl from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to go ahead and get it cleaned up. I don't know if this is considered a vase or a little fish bowl, but I used a baby wipe to get the rest of that little residue off, and then I kind of wiped off the outside. And then I used a microfiber, a little towel to clean up, or just dust, I guess you could say, the inside of it. After I did that, though, and here you can see with that, when I was kind of in progress with this project, I was wishing that I had actually cleaned the inside with rubbing alcohol. I noticed that there were either fingerprints or there was something going on, and the alcohol ink was kind of clinging to that and making it not perfect. You know, I'm going to be doing other things with this, so it wasn't all that noticeable in the end, but it was something that I knew was there. It was bothering me. So just a word of the wise, definitely might want to clean the inside of it. But I've picked out an alcohol ink here. I believe it was just called Navy, and you saw me adding some water to it. I was trying to figure out a way to get the alcohol ink to cover the entire inside surface of this little bowl without being too dark and getting. Sometimes alcohol ink, it can, I don't know what the right word is for it. It can create kind of harsh lines with itself. That's probably a really bad description, but at any rate, I wanted it to be uniform. And so I spent a lot of time trying to empty out some of the water because you saw that I'd gotten too much water in there, adding more alcohol ink, trying to get the right consistency for it to just nicely coat the inside of my bowl and get it to the right hue. Because essentially I'm just staining this little glass bowl and I want it to be a really pretty blue ocean kind of color, right? Like a coastal inspired color. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm shaking it a lot because I'm trying to get that ink to fully coat in all the places. And I decided I needed to add some more. It wasn't quite dark enough for me. So I'm shaking it a lot because, again, and I think the scientific term for it is the surface tension. I could have that wrong, but essentially the ink was getting a little caught up in certain areas on the glass. And so I was shaking it to try and help break that tension and let it hit all of the little places in the glass. So I finally got it to a really good consistency and I just continued to let it coat. Just took my time and made sure that I got the entire surface. And once I was done, I emptied it out onto my little baby wipe and I set it aside to dry. A couple of days later, I came back to it. It's all dry now. I love the color of it. And I have this twine or jute cord. I'm not sure exactly what this is. It could be either. I'm honestly not sure. But it's a thin piece, right? And I'm measuring off a double length or a double strand, I guess you could say, about 2 feet in length. And I'm cutting that off. Now I'm going to measure to get a loop that will fit around the top of my little bowl. And I'm going to tie this off. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of frame, but I'm just doing a loop knot. And I'm going to continue to measure that as I pull the knot tight to make sure that I'm going to have this loop that will sit just over the rim of my bowl. I don't want it to drop too far down, and I want it to be snug. So I'm just going to keep working with that until I get to the way I want it. And now that I've got it where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and I guess first I'm going to check and make sure that it's nice and a good length because of what I'm going to be doing with this. But now I'm going to measure off using the tail end of that loop thing that I just created and get additional strands, double strands that are that length, plus about 1 inch, because I'm going to be tying them onto the loop that I created. And I want to make sure that everything is about the same length in the end. And so I am cutting a total of 7 additional loops here total, because with my tails, that'll make 8. Hopefully you're following what I'm saying, but you're going to see in just a minute what I'm talking about. So went ahead and continued to cut each of these, making sure that they were all double lengths. If I had to guess, I would say that these are about 18 inches long. But now that I've got them all cut, I'm going to tie them onto my loop. So I'm leaving them doubled over, and I'm using that loop in the doubling to stick my little ends through. I'm not explaining this well at all, but I'm going to show you in a close-up in just a second, so bear with me if you're not understanding what I'm saying, because I feel like I am not being clear. But here we go. So close-up coming here. Going to put my little loop through there. I'm taking the ends and sticking it through the folded loop and pulling it tight around the original loop that I'm tying it around. You're going to be able to see better in just a second, but hopefully that makes a little bit more sense because I put it in real time as well. So once I have them all tied on there, here you go again. This is the last one. I put it through the loop. I put my ends through the loop of the new one, right? And I tightened it. So now I've got 8 different double strands coming down off of my original loop that I had created. And one set of those strands is the tail that I had created with making the loop, making sure that everything is evenly spaced here. And once I do that, I'm going to take one strand from one knot on the left and then a strand from the knot on the right. I'm going to tie those together. So just one of the 2 strands from each side, I'm going to tie them together, and I'm going to do that all the way around. So I'm taking one from the left, one from the right, and tying a knot, and it's just a loopy knot. I don't know what the technical term for the knot is, but just tying the 2 of them together. It's not a tie your shoelace kind of knot. It's tying them both together into a loop. I'm at a loss for words right now, you guys, but hopefully you're kind of getting what I'm talking about. I did that all the way around, and now I'm going to go down to the next layer, next row, so to speak, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, and it's going to kind of create a diamond pattern. So you can start to kind of see what I'm doing here. And I'll continue to work my way down, and once I get low enough and it starts curving back under, because of the shape of the bowl, I'm going to flip it over and I'll start working on the other part of it and try and make sure that I'm getting it as snug as I can as I come up over the bottom of my bowl now. But this is all we're doing. We are literally just taking a strand from either side, tying a knot. I'm trying to make sure that my new knot is centered between the 2 knots that came before it, because I want this all to be somewhat symmetrical. So I'm doing my best to just try and make sure that I keep everything even. So you'll see in just another minute. But once I did that, I continued to work it all the way up to the top. I trimmed off the ends and just tucked those ends under to make it nice and neat. And now it's going to sit nicely on my tabletop. And I think this is super cute, but let me know what you think. DIY number 4. All right, this is a random pumpkin that I had had flowers all over at one point. I don't recall why I pulled the flowers off of it. I must have needed them for another project at one point. And then I have the stem that I was just fixing up here that it started to pull apart a little bit. And then I have a bag of potpourri. I was talking with Rich trying to figure out a couple of different project ideas, and he pulled out this potpourri and he said, "Hey, can you do something with this?" And I thought, well, maybe. So it's all fall colors. I was like, well, what happens if I try to cover a pumpkin with all of these little potpourri pieces? And it's something you could set on your shelf and it would smell good too. So it's going to be a little bit eclectic here, if that's the right word for this. Rustic? I don't even know what to call this, but I was trying to figure out if I should start from the bottom or from the top. Ultimately, the top won out, and it worked out quite well. So I am just going to put random little pieces here, trying to figure out if I want to put them right side up or upside down. There are a lot of various colors and textures, and there are a lot of neat little pieces here. So this is probably going to be a project either you love or hate. I actually ended up loving it. I think it's really cool looking in the end. And it's kind of like putting a puzzle together. There were definitely some pieces in the potpourri that were just too large to work with. There were these things in here. I don't know if you see that on the table there. It's kind of red. It's to the left of my left hand. It's kind of under my hand at the moment, but it reminded me of an apple core. I have no idea what it is. It must be some sort of a pod of some type, but it looks like an apple core to me, like a dried apple core. And yeah, I don't know what it is. If you happen to know what it is, I would love to know. But I ended up not being able to use those. They were just a little too bulky. So I was tending to stick with the pieces that were a little bit flatter. I did use some of the larger rounded pods in the end. I didn't think I was going to be using those. I thought that they were going to be too large as well, but I ended up being able to incorporate some of those, especially as I worked my way down the sides of the pumpkin. And I had some of the flatter pieces that were kind of sticking out because of the curvature of the pumpkin. So I took those opportunities to use some of those larger pods underneath and just kind of brought them in to cover more of that orange pumpkin. My goal here is really just to make sure that the orange is camouflaged. Wherever I saw some orange, I added a little bit more of the potpourri, and I just continued to do that until I had it all set. And I had that little, I think that's like a wheat stem that I thought was cute that I stuck in there next to the stem. But let me know what you think of this. DIY number 5. For this project, I have a couple of scrap pieces of fabric from my stash. These were both from the Dollar Tree. As you can see, I have used them in the past for something. I, to be honest, don't remember what I used them for. It must have been last year. But I am just trying to get them all lined up. I am looking at it thinking, you know what, I really should press this. Of course I didn't, because I'm being lazy. But to do it right, you really should press it, right? And anyway, I'm just trying to think about how I want to do this to maximize my fabric. So I pulled out my self-healing mat, and I'm using my rotary cutter, which clearly needs to be sharpened, or I just honestly probably just need to be pressing harder on it than I was to make it through both pieces of fabric. But I eventually succeeded. And in doing that, I realized I can't see through the fabric to see my lines on my mat. So it's a little hard to cut a straight line. So I opted to fold the fabric over instead of trying to use the rotary cutter. I'm just going to use my scissors here. So I'm lining it up. I am measuring off about a 4-inch square. No, not square. Strip. So this whole strip is about 4 inches. And then I'm going to hold that in place and cut right along the crease that I've created with the fabric. And I'm going to continue to do that with the rest of the fabric until I have as many strips out of this as I can get. Now, this project, you can certainly just use strips. I'm opting for squares. So I don't know if you noticed, I had folded the corner down to create a triangle and then cut along that edge that was created. So here, folding it down, and now I'm just going to cut along that edge of the triangle. And that's going to give me a 4-inch square, right? A perfect square, or as close to perfect as I can get, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of the fabric, trying to get as many squares out of this as I possibly can. I did realize that I could use my rotary cutter for this piece, so that's what I did, and it sped things along. And now I am going to lay everything out in a checkerboard pattern. Now, as I said before, you can certainly just use strips, or we call them stripes if you would like. I have opted for the checkerboard pattern. You can also do this with solid colors. You can do a mix of solid and prints, whatever is going to make your heart happy. This is a great project for using scrap material, scrap fabric. So just getting this all laid out, I ultimately am going to do 5 across and 5 down, but you can certainly make it as small or large as you would like. So 4 times 5 is 20, but when I take my seam allowances in, this probably ends up being closer to, I would say, probably 16 or 17 inches as a finished project, just to give you an idea. So now I'm going to pin a couple of these together, making sure that I'm keeping them in the order that I want, and so that they will also appear upright once they are all put together. So I'm being conscious of my pattern, just because I feel the need to do that. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it's the way I'm doing it. This is also the very first time that I am attempting something like this, at least in a very long time. I had done a similar project in the Girl Scouts back in like 5th grade. And yeah, that was a very long time ago. So I'm just going a little bit slow here. I was hesitant to pin together too much until I was kind of in a groove. And then I was able to kind of move it along a little bit faster. And I figured out it was all fine to just kind of pin it more. But I'm going to run this through the sewing machine, just these 2 squares along that edge that I had pinned. I am using my white thread. You could certainly use another color coordinating thread. I opted for the white because I already had it in the machine, and a lot of these squares have the white background. So I thought it was going to be appropriate. And then I did the same thing with the other 2 squares that I had pinned. And I'm pretty much running them almost right along the right edge of my presser foot. I'm not leaving a whole lot of extra room. There was maybe like 2 millimeters more room on the right side. But I'm being very careful to make sure that I'm using the same seam allowance. I don't know if that's the right word. I want to make sure that my seam is the same on every single piece that I sew together here, because we're going to need to be able to line these up a little bit later. And if my seams are different, things are not going to line up the way that they need to. So you might have seen that once I had the 2 squares sewed together and the other 2 squares sewn together, I've now put those 4 together and I've sewn them together, and just making sure that I'm keeping them in my pattern. So here you can see those are sewn together. The 5th piece out of this particular line from top to bottom, I'm going to pin that last piece to it, and I'm going to sew that together as well. And so I'm going to just keep doing that with all of these pieces, and I'm going to create 5 strips. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with the next row that I just did, and then the same thing with the row after that, and so on and so on. Okay, and so here I've got my 5 strips that are all sewn together, and now I'm going to start piecing these together. Now I'm just going to line up these seams, right? So this is where I was talking about needing to make sure your seams are the same all the way through the project, because if they're not, you're not going to have, all your pieces are going to end up being different widths, right? And so you're not going to be able to get your pattern to line up. So just make sure that when you're sewing this, you're doing the same exact amount of seam, whatever that seam is that you decide to make it, and just make sure it's the same. So now I'm going to pin these together. You know, to do it right, I really should be opening this up and pressing each of these. But again, being lazy, it turned out just fine without doing that. But to do it right, you really should press it, open it, each seam, press them, you know. But anyway, I opted not to. So I've got it all pinned together. All 5 of my strips are pinned together. So you can see I got a little braver and was doing more at a time. And that's going to help my project move along faster as well, because now I can sew it all at once too. And again, using the same amount of seam, creating the same size seam on each of these, because that will allow my squares to remain squares. Right? If I were to do a larger seam now than what I had done before, my squares are going to end up being rectangles, right? Not squares. So here it is all sewn together. I've got the pins taken out. And the next thing I'm going to do is grab a solid piece of scrap fabric from my stash. And this is just a plain white fabric. And this is going to be my backing. So to try and figure out the exact size, I opted not to measure it. Instead, I'm just going to set my sewn pieces down on top of it. I'm going to pin the whole thing all the way around, and then I'll cut it out. So you'll see me doing that in just a moment. And I had another point that I wanted to make on this, and it's escaping me now. But as you can see, you could certainly do this in stripes and have a striped pillow. You could do something much larger and create a quilt. It doesn't have to be a pillow, right? But really, really great to use up scrap fabric and make something cute for your couch or your bed. So going to go ahead and trim this off, as I mentioned. And once I have this all cut away, I am then going to sew these pieces together. So as I start, I'm going to be starting at one of the corners, going back and forth to anchor my stitch so that it doesn't come unraveled. I didn't bother to do that with the individual pieces because I knew that they were going to get stitched over as a course of the project, right? So there wasn't the same risk of having the stitches come unraveled. When I worked my way around, I stopped with about 2 squares left to go. You saw me going back and forth again to anchor my stitch. I can go ahead and set the machine aside. I'm going to take all my pins out, and then I'm going to be ready to flip this right side out. So I'm just going to stick my hand in there, pull it all out, and get it all ready to be stuffed. So just want to make sure that I'm working all of the corners out and getting it good. So here it is. And now I'm going to take my fiber fill and I am going to go ahead and get it stuffed. So like I said, I left those 2 squares open at the bottom, and when we're done stuffing it, we'll sew that up by hand. So here it is, all stuffed and nice. You can just get it to the plumpness or the density that you want it. And once you're happy with that, then you go ahead and seal it up. I pinned this closed just to help me to make sure that it just makes it easier to sew it up. And I'm just using a needle and thread, white thread again, the same thread that I was using for sewing the pieces with the machine. And I'm just going to sew it right along this bottom edge with teeny tiny little stitches to make them as invisible as possible. When I get to the end, I tied it off, but then I always like to leave a tail inside the project. So I'm running my needle through a little ways, just a couple of inches, and cutting that off and then pulling it back down into the pillow. And this is done. Let me know what you think. I love it. DIY number 6. All right, I have a white styrofoam pumpkin from the Dollar Tree and my plaster chalk paint by Waverly, and I'm going to be giving this a couple of coats. But first, when I opened up my paint, I noticed that it was getting a little thick. I've had this for a couple of years, and over time the paint tends to dry out, so just add a little bit of water. I'm gonna shake it up really well and bring my paint right back to life. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to be giving this a couple of really good coats of paint, and once that is done, we'll be able to move on to decorating. I saw something online that I thought was really, really pretty, and it's what inspired me to do this. Gonna go ahead and peel that sticker off so I can paint the whole pumpkin. And if you have, oh, I forgot about this part. So the stem, this is brushed gold by Folk Art, and just gonna give the little stem a paint of the gold. But as I was starting to say before, if you have little blingy strips that are single file lines, so to speak, this project would be a lot easier. I didn't have anything like that in my stash, so I am using these also from the Dollar Tree. I think it still came out really pretty, but they were definitely a little harder to work with because they're thicker. So the first thing I'm going to do is cover up that seam going around the pumpkin. If you use the orange or the black pumpkins from the Dollar Tree for this, they have the seams going down the sides rather than around the middle, and I find those a little bit easier to get rid of because you can actually sand those down and make them pretty much disappear. I didn't think that this would work as well because of all of the ridges in the pumpkin, and I don't know, there was just something different about the way that the pieces came together at that seam. So I opted to just cover it up with my little blingy strips here, and it worked out just fine. I did take away one of those little beads at the very tip, but didn't realize that it was sitting on basically an adhesive strip that's completely solid. So I ended up having to cut that out to allow me to join this strand with the first strand that I put down. So I'm just going to be able to butt it right up against there. I was just having trouble getting it lined up. And then I can continue on my way around the rest of the girth of the pumpkin. And when I get to the end, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll be trimming down. You can see how it's kind of rounded there at the starting point. So I'm going to be trimming it off in such a way that it curves around the starting point so that it looks, so it camouflages the seam. So it looks like it just continues on with no seam there. So once we have that down, I'm going to go ahead and use some more of the, I'm calling them bling strips for lack of a better term. I don't know what these are called, and I can't see the package on there, and I forgot to look at it before I threw it away. But I'm going to now come in and create a pattern. And this is where I was saying, if you have thinner strips to work with, it would be a little bit easier. I'm making it work by pulling on it relatively tight and kind of stretching the outer edge to come along with me as I curve it. So if you're working with straight lines, these are great, but a little bit more challenging when you are trying to do some curly cues with them like I'm doing here. I'm going to come in and do the same thing on this side of the pumpkin, and I end up doing a total of 3. So keeping in mind that I only had 3 of these strips left, I did make sure that I was kind of going in thirds around the pumpkin. And so just going to continue to pull and stretch and curve that around, and then I'll come in and do the same thing with the last strip. They weren't all completely uniform. I noticed that some curved around in curly cues more than others, but I think it made for a really pretty effect and a really pretty pattern in the end. This last one I ended up because maybe I was trying to cover a little bit more area, perhaps. I'm not sure. Maybe I had not quite done it in thirds here, but because of the surface area I was trying to cover, I ended up not having it curly Q quite as much, but I did have that leftover piece from when I was wrapping it around the middle of the pumpkin that I was then able to go ahead and put down. So you can see I have kind of a white space there. So I'm going to notch out that little, sorry, I'm off camera there, but I'm basically notching out that little piece to allow it to butt up against the original one there. Excuse me. And just curving it around the rest of the way. And this is done. I think it turned out super sweet. It makes me think of Cinderella for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this one. DIY number 7. All right, this is a little hanging shelf from the Dollar Tree. It's actually got two little... All right, this is a gift bag from Hobby Lobby. It came in a pack of 2. I think I used one of them last year, maybe, or maybe it was for Christmas in July. But the little wood piece is from a pack, I think it was a pack of 6 that I'd gotten from the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to be painting what will be the back side of it white. I'm not so concerned about the front side of it because the front side of it is going to be completely covered, but I am going to make sure that I get all of the edges and that I wrap the paint around just a little bit to the front side so that there is complete coverage in what will be showing eventually. So here I'm just getting all of the edges, and this just took one good coat of paint. Once I have that painted, I'll set it aside and I will, well, I guess I did kind of dry it with my heat gun, but then I'll set it aside to let it finish drying, and I'm going to start working on my bag. So I'm going to just cut out that front panel with the whole image intact and leaving myself a wide berth because I'm not quite sure. And I was thinking afterwards when I was doing this, I was like, you silly, you should have measured it, or not measured it, but traced it with the wooden panel before you painted the wooden panel. But it's fine. It all works out. You know, it's funny, as you go through projects, you learn all the ways that you should have done it as you make it through the project. So hopefully you learn from my mistakes and you can do as I say and not as I do as far as finding some ways to save yourself some time. But yeah, so to do this over again, I would have tried to trace this onto my bag first. It just would have saved me a whole lot of time because then I could have just cut it out directly rather than doing what I'm doing now. So I'm placing it down and just going to trim off the sides first, because it is a little bit difficult to see if I am centering it top to bottom. I probably could have put it on top and kind of pressed down along the edges to kind of make a crease where the wood was underneath. I don't know if that makes sense, but there are a lot of different ways you can do this. This is just the way that I opted to do it. And I just continued to trim pieces away until I got it where I needed it. And I wasn't too concerned with my cuts being exact because I knew that I wanted to leave a little bit of a little bit of it is going to be hanging over the edge of my wood because I want to make sure I get it nice and sealed on there, and then I'll be using a sanding block and a little bit to trim away the edges. So I really just want to make sure that I wasn't going to have a ton of overage because I figured it would make it harder for me to ensure that the image was centered. So that's part of why I wasn't super concerned with drawing the lines out, and I was just kind of trimming it by hand in the beginning. So now that I've gotten it to where I want it, I am ready to secure it. And I found that because these are gift bags and the gift bag material is a little heavier than a lot of the paper that I normally work with. So here's my Mod Podge. I'm just using the matte Mod Podge, but you can use whatever kind you want. You could use school glue for this also. It doesn't have to be Mod Podge. But I found that, things like the calendar pages from the Dollar Tree, they're very thin, right? So they always tend, when I use Mod Podge, to wrinkle up on me and expand and bubble and crease. With these gift bags, they were heavy enough that they did not do that. And it was such a pleasure to work with this material with the Mod Podge. I will say that did like to curl up. You can see it starting to curl on the ends. So my solve for that, you can see it curling right up. Flipped it over upside down, made sure that it was still centered and everything, that I didn't slide it some weird way. And then I just put my Mod Podge container on top of it, just something heavy, right? So that it doesn't lift up and allow those edges to curl. So I set that aside to dry. Once it was dry, I was ready to sand it down. As I mentioned, just gonna sand all those edges. This is just a Dollar Tree sanding block that I've worn down enough that I'm now wrapping a new piece of Dollar Tree sandpaper that came in a pack of like 50 sheets. I wrapped that around it and voila. Once I had that all done, I pulled out my glitter. I love this Arteza glitter. It's very fine. And this particular color that I pulled out is a white iridescent. And I'm going to use my Mod Podge again with a little tiny brush to apply Mod Podge to just the places where I would imagine snow accumulating. And I'm just going to fancy this up a little bit with my glitter to make it look like there's some snow remnants kind of glistening on it. This particular gift bag is just a flat image. It's matte. There's no glitter going on, which I'm fine with. Usually, I don't normally like a ton of glitter because I find it gets all over everything. So you don't have to do this, but I just wanted to dress it up a little bit. Just to make it look a little bit more finished, I guess. But you can certainly skip this step if you want. I also thought about maybe doing something to frame it or to add some sort of greenery to it, but I just wasn't coming up with any really good ideas that I thought would not deter from the image. So in the end, I opted to keep it simple and just fancied it up with the glitter, and then we'll be putting a little stand on the back side of it in just a second. So I am just dusting off the excess glitter now. It is still wet, so I'm being mindful to stay away from the Mod Podged areas and just brushing away some of that extra glitter onto my parchment paper. So you saw that I put a ton of glitter on here. I used almost the entire container in the process, and now I've got it all on my parchment paper, and I'm going to pour it right back into the container so that I can use it again later. So that's it for that part of it. And now I'm going to be fastening on some little jingle bells for my stand. Now, I normally use wood, little wood beads for this, similar to what I used for the gnome's feet in the last project. And it usually works really well. And I thought, oh, jingle bells would be really cute. Well, I didn't place them quite properly, and they are super light. And they just, they weren't quite doing it. I had them a little bit too high up, and then by the time I realized it, they had already cooled. Now I could have used my heat gun to loosen the glue again and slide them a little bit, but those bells were going to get hot. So instead, and I'm sorry I'm a little out of frame here, I ended up adding a little glob of glue to the top of each of those, or the bottom, depending on how you want to look at it, of each of those little jingle bells. And now I'm just trying to get it to cool. It's hard to see here on camera, but essentially I added additional little feet to those bells to prop this up a little bit more, so that it'll stand upright and not fall over. That was honestly all I did, and it worked perfectly. So let me know what you think. DIY number 8. Shelves in here and a cord with a little ring for hanging it. I'm setting that stuff aside because I am just after the wood that's in here, and I'm going to be making a little sign with this. I have another transfer. Again, as I said, you don't have to use transfers. You could use stencils, or you could hand letter things, or you could Mod Podge something. So there are a lot of different ways of decorating with words and other sorts of things. But I've pulled out, you can see these little wood stars from my little stash that they came from the Dollar Tree as well, in a pack of a whole bunch of different sizes and shapes of things. And this napkin is something from a pack that I picked up at my local grocery store just recently. I have done at least one other craft with these napkins. I think it's just one. But I had Mod Podged it in a way that made the whole thing kind of wrinkle, which ended up being great for that particular project. I don't want that to happen this time, so I am going to use a different method. I'm just kind of figuring out how I'm going to want this laid out, but I do know that I want to paint this because when I Mod Podge that napkin, it ends up being a little bit translucent. So I want to make sure I have that white background so my white stripes look white and not the yellowish tone from the wood. Using my heat gun to dry the paint. This is my Adirondack White by Home Decor. It is a plaid product just like Waverly. And now I've got my Mod Podge. This happens to be a matte Mod Podge, but I don't think it really matters what kind of Mod Podge you use. You could use whatever you'd like. So giving this a really good coat just on the top surface with the Mod Podge. I'm going to dry it again, and then it'll be ready to put down my napkin. So once I've got it nice and dry, I'm going to go ahead and line it up where I want it. I'm kind of pressing it down a little bit. It's not really going to do anything because it's not really tacky any longer, but I just got it set, and now I've got my easy press, my mini easy press that I'm going to plug in and get turned on. If you don't have an easy press, an iron will work just fine. I just happen to have this little guy in my craft room, so that is what I'm using. So while I'm waiting for that to heat up, I thought I would go ahead and start prepping my stars. It took me a minute to actually find this gold chalk paste that I wanted to use. So in the meantime, my little easy press was heated up. So I'm literally just pressing this on just like you would an iron. You want to be careful that you don't scorch the napkin. In all honesty, I should have put down a piece of parchment paper over it. Didn't occur to me at the time. I realized towards the end of what I was doing, I was like, ooh, I should have put some parchment paper down because I did feel like I was going to start scorching it. But as you can see, it's nice and adhered now. I wanted to rip off the excess napkin. I probably could have just used a pair of scissors, but I'm trying to be careful. This is not wet, obviously, and so it doesn't tear as easily as it would if I had used the wet Mod Podge. So I was just trying to be careful. For the excess, I am using a piece of sandpaper. Now, I certainly could have done that to begin with, but there was just a lot of excess napkin and it would have been in the way, which is why I chose to tear it off first and then came in with the sandpaper to clean it up. Now that that's on there, I'm going to go ahead and seal it with some Mod Podge over the top. If you weren't going to be putting anything over top of this, it probably wouldn't be as necessary because it was definitely nicely adhered, but I am putting something over this with my transfer, so I want to make sure it's not going to damage the napkin when I do that. So making sure that the Mod Podge is sealing it in, that'll also help protect that surface. I used my heat gun again, I'm just kind of making sure it's nice and dry, fuzzed my little transfer again, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply it to my piece here. I'm going to use the pattern and the stripes to my advantage, making sure that it's nice and dry, because again, I don't want my transfer to stick to this either. So, but using the pattern to my advantage to just get this all nice and lined up, I'm making sure that it's got the same amount of space, top and bottom. This was my first test. Yes, it came off, no problem. So just gonna go ahead and get that lined up. Once I was satisfied with the location there, I went ahead and grabbed my gold chalk paste. And this is in just one of the little sample, it's supposed to be single-use packets. I tend to get more than a single use out of them. I just kind of seal them up again when I'm done with them, and I stick them back in my stash. So that's the way I've been doing it. I will fold it over several times and then tape it up just to keep the paste moist. So I went ahead and peeled that up. I know it's really hard to see it on camera here, but it actually looks really cute in person. I'm using that same chalk paste because I wanted my stars to match the same color. So I'm using that same chalk paste to paint all my little stars, and just using a little brush to do that. I had started just using the excess that was on that little squeegee, but it's definitely easier to paint these with a brush. Now just using some hot glue once these are dry, and again, the chalk paste dries super fast, which was another reason why I wanted to use it on the stars, not just because it was going to match the middle there, but going ahead and applying a tiny little bit of hot glue to the center there, and then covering up those holes that are in my wood, although they are covered up with the napkin now. They are still slightly visible. And there you go. I'm loving this. So now I decided I wanted to have a little stand for the back of it. So I've got these other little pieces that came out of the same little package that the stars had come out of. So those rectangular shapes. And then I have a couple of little mini wooden cubes from a pack from the Dollar Tree. And I am using them to kind of create an angled little backing. I don't know. I was making it up as I went here, you guys. So just trying to figure out how best to make this work. I knew I needed one piece that was going to be longer than the other in order to create a slant for the sign. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. But I'm applying these little wood cubes to the shorter piece right now. That's going to be the base. And just making sure that that's going to be there to support the longer piece. So I'm using glue on the edge, and then also on the little, the edge of the cube too, where it's joining with the longer rectangular piece. You could do this with popsicle sticks. You know, you don't have to have these tiny little pieces. You could just cut a couple of popsicle sticks and do it that way. There are actually a lot of different ways that you can make backings for signs. I'm going to be doing something different in a little bit on a different project that you'll see, so you'll have another option, which is actually a lot less involved. So you can see here, I'm going ahead and attaching it. I'm using that long edge and then the cube edge. And so it's just going to kind of create an angled stand. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about now. Let me know what you think. DIY number 9.
Two, I'm going to call them rattan wreath forms from the Dollar Tree, and I've got a smaller version and a larger version. I'm going to be connecting them together, and to use that you could use wire, but I have this, it's kind of the paper wrapped wire that I got off of Amazon. I do have it linked in my Amazon store. If that's of interest to you, you can find that in my description box, a link to my Amazon store. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this around. I'm also going to tuck the wire through some of the wreath form itself, just to try to provide a little bit more stability. And you'll see here, I'm just gonna kind of try and tuck it through the actual wreath itself, not just around it. So kind of poking it in between the, again, I don't know if this is considered to be rattan or if there's some other term that's to be used for this, but I'm kind of putting it in between the strands of whatever this material would be considered.
So once I have that all set, I'm going to take some of my burlap ribbon that I got from Costco. This is my Kirkland's ribbon that I'm always talking about. And I'm going to tie a length of it around the neck here. I'm just going to make a knot. This is going to be a very simple way of creating a bow. These are going to be my little tails for my bow in a moment. And then I'll take another length of the ribbon and I'll create my bow part. So I'm just going to unravel this a bit and I'm going to measure off a little bit of ribbon. I think if I had to guess, because you all know I tend not to measure things all the time, but I would say there are probably about 3-inch loops. So on either side of the center, I've got a loop that's about 3, maybe 4 inches. I did not want this to be too large, so I also did it until I had 5 loops on either side. I just wrapped it around and around, and now I'm going to notch the middle. So fold it in half a little bit to find the center, and then just put a little teeny tiny notch on either side to grab some more of my little wrapped wire trim. Not trim, but that's what I'm using to connect the bow. So you could also use a chenille stem. I just decided to use this because I was already using it to secure the wreath forms together. And I'm going to fluff out all of my loops. I'm just alternating back and forth from left to right. And once I have that all fluffed up, I'll go ahead and use the ends of the the paper wrapped wire to go ahead and secure that on top of the knot that I created. And I did want this a little bit off center, so you'll see that it's kind of off to one side. You could certainly center this if you'd like. You can put it on the other side if you'd like. I've got mine kind of off to the right side of my little wreath forms here. Once I have it in place, I'm going to dovetail the ends, just folding that in half and cutting the ribbon at an angle. And you want the shorter part of the angle on the folded edge. So once that's done, I'm going to take a piece of burlap and I folded it a little bit so that I could double up what I was doing. So I folded it here. I'm going to fold it actually again because I'm trying to preserve as much of my burlap as I can. And I also want to make sure that I've got the same shape and that it's kind of symmetrical. So I'm going to go ahead and cut here. I'm folding it over a little bit more because I was like, I don't need it to be quite that wide when I cut it. But going ahead and cutting an ear shape. So making our little bunny ears here. Once I have those, I'm going to take my paper wrapped wire again. I don't know if there's a technical name for that, but I thought at first I was going to weave it through the burlap and then decided that was just going to end up unraveling it and it wasn't going to be what I wanted it. So I set a piece of my parchment paper down underneath and I am going to get my glue gun here and just put out a strand of glue, a bead of glue. And then I'm going to secure down my wire. And notice I did get my little finger protector. Be real careful when you're working with the hot glue. I have been known to burn myself pretty badly. So in this particular instance, I decided I really needed to be using the finger protector because I'm pretty much putting my finger right down on where the glue is as I try to get this all situated. So just be careful when you do that. So getting this all along the outer edge, I did not put it along the bottom, just along the 2 sides. And then I'll go ahead with my wire cutters and snip that off. And then I will do the same thing with the other one. But you can see here, I'm going to be able to gather up that little base to create that ear shape. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the other. And then I am going to kind of gather the bottom as I started to show you before. And I'm using a little bit of hot glue just to keep it in place and get the shape of the ear that I want. Doing that with both, kind of flattening them out a little bit. Going to use some more hot glue here. And then I'm going to secure the top so the smaller of the two wreath forms. This is our little bunny's head. Just going to secure that on there. And then I've got these really pretty peonies that I've had in my stash for quite some time. I had gotten these off of Amazon actually several years ago. I had gotten several different bouquets of them, and this is the last one that I have. But I just thought that they were really pretty, and I like the color scheme with the burlap. So I had pulled apart my pick, true to form, right? And I'm just trying to figure out where I want to put these. At first I thought I was going to do a little fluffy tail with some Dollar Tree microfiber cloth. I have that kind of off, I guess it's a dust cloth actually, or a mop dust head thing. But I decided I was just going to use the flowers instead, and that could serve as a little, not so much a fluffy tail, but it's going to be representative of the tail, right? Because it's obviously not a tail, it's three little flowers down at the base. But once I had everything where I wanted it, I'm securing it all with some generous amounts of hot glue. And just be aware that if your hot glue setting is on high, you might melt some of those little stems. So just be aware, you might need to help it a little. But let me know what you think of this. I am in love with it. DIY number 10. Okay, this is a cutout from the Dollar Tree. It is wood, and obviously it's a snowflake. I'm going to be using my antique wax on this with a baby wipe, and I'm just going to give it a good coat on both sides, and so that it's nice and stained. And then once that is dry, I'm going to grab, this is, I think it's technically a clothesline. I'm not sure. I think I'd gotten it at Habitat for Humanity Restore, and it was only like $1 or $2 for this really big spool. So obviously I'm getting towards the end of what I have of this. I've used it for a lot of different projects, but just wanted to make sure that I had enough for what I was intending here. And I do have another ball of it that I had used for an attempt on another project that didn't come to fruition, so I just have that excess there. But after my gnome, I had a bunch of fuzzies, black fuzzies from my socks on my hot glue gun, so I was just trying to get that cleaned up a little bit there. But because I don't want to be depositing black fuzz onto my snowflake. So just getting the end of the cord nice and clean, and so it's not frayed, and I'm going to add some hot glue there and just seal it, because I don't want it to start unraveling essentially. So I wanted to make sure that I had that ready and good to go, and then I will start applying it to my snowflake. So I'm going to just draw a bead of glue just inside the edge of the wood cutout. I don't want to go all the way to the edge. I do want to be able to see some of that wood on the other side of the cord. So I'm just leaving a little bit of a gap there. And just pretty much trying to form the cord around. Now I could have used a more narrow cord, but I felt like with the hot glue, I needed something that was going to be a little thicker, because I didn't want a lot of the hot glue to be showing. And if I'd used something thinner, the nozzle on my hot glue just isn't small enough that I wouldn't be able to put, it was going to be too much glue. You could also use yarn for this. It doesn't have to be a heavy cord like this, but I really like the way this looks. This might be a little heavier than a macrame cord if I had to guess, but I'm not 100% certain, because I don't know if I've actually ever worked with a real macrame cord. But I was pleasantly surprised at how well this turned out. I have to be honest. At first I was wondering if I was going to regret trying to decorate the snowflake this way. I would 100% do it again in a heartbeat, because I think it came out so super cute. So again, just going to try and figure out what kind of a pattern. I'm making this up as I go here, y'all. I knew that I wanted to decorate it with the cord. I just wasn't sure how I wanted it decorated with the cord. So this was all really kind of made up as I went. But as I got the hang of it, it went faster and faster. And I realized, okay, I can just kind of draw a bead of glue and then just go ahead and apply my cord down right over that bead of glue that I'm applying. So once I had that all down, I just figured out where my end needed to match up. I got it as close as I could. I'm trying my best to camouflage the ends of the cord so that it's not super obvious where the seams are, so to speak. I mean, obviously, if you look for them, you're going to find them on this project, but I did my best to try to hide them as much as possible and get them all matched up. So that was my second row. And now for the middle, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do here. And then ultimately I thought, oh, maybe it would be nice just to do a bunch of cords kind of like crisscrossing in the middle and knotting the ends and just kind of filling in that space with something that looks like a little bit of a snowflake in and of itself. So that was what I did, and I trimmed those ends down so that it fits nice and neatly in the center area, and then I just secured it with a drop of hot glue for each knot. And that was all that I did for this one. I think it is so pretty. One more drop of glue. And this is done except for the hanger, which we will do in just a moment. I thought about using a piece of the cord for the hanger, and then ultimately decided I was going to use the twine that it came with originally. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently the way that it was originally on there. So I'm going to go ahead and tie that knot back in it before I put it on the project. And I'm going to run it from front to back and allow that little knot to serve as the stop to keep it from going all the way through. So then I'm also going to make sure that the knot is nice and tight and trim off the excess. So there's literally just a knot there. And to give it some more support so that the knot doesn't come undone, I'm going to add a little bit of hot glue. I started to do it from the front and then realized I needed to do it from the back. So just making sure that that's there, and I'm pulling it a little bit taut, but not so much so that I risk pulling the knot through the project. And that is it for this one. I think this is really super sweet. I hope you like it too, but let me know what you think as I show you the end result here hanging on my wall. DIY number 11. Okay, these are from Chalk Couture. So they are these fun little star cutouts, and they are shelf sitters. And then these transfers, they're like silk screening is the best way that I can describe it, because the stencil, it's not a stencil, they call them transfers, but the white space, it's actually mesh that's there if you've not worked with Chalk Couture before. But I'm going to go ahead and cut all these pieces apart, and once I have them all apart, I can decide what I want to use for which pieces. And I'm only going to work with the star shapes for this particular project. I'll save the other pieces for another day. And I'm just deciding which ones I wanted to do. Now, I probably could have done them double-sided. I did not bother to do it this time double-sided. I just wanted to have the single side. So I'm just trying to decide which ones I want to use, because I have 2 of the medium-sized and 2 of the small-sized as far as options go. So I'm showing you my paste. That is Cadet, and then the other one is Candy Apple. The candy apple came in one of my little monthly packs, so it was just like a sample size. And then I have the full size jar of the Cadet Blue. So I am just going to fuzz my transfers here because they're a little bit too tacky when they are first being used. You can use these over and over again. I think I can't remember if it's 10 times or 20 times that they say that you can use them before they start to, I suppose, have issues. I don't know. I haven't used mine over and over again yet, so I can't really speak to it. But once I got it fuzzed so that I'll be able to peel it back up off of my surface, I went ahead and got it all nice and lined up. And then once I had all of the edges completely lined up, I just rubbed it down. Obviously, it took me a minute to get the hang of it for this first one. But once I had it lined up, I went ahead and rubbed it down. And then I was ready to go with my paste. And I wanted to work relatively quickly with this because I have had challenges where my paste has dried a little bit too much before I lifted up the transfer, and then the paint ended up coming up with the transfer and my design wasn't what I wanted it to be. Now, when I was working with this, I noticed that it was a little bit more liquid than some of the paste I've worked with in recent past. And so my paste, I might have just needed to add a little bit of distilled water to the pastes that I've been working with in the past. Here I'm starting to just peel it up just to be safe because I was nervous about not working fast enough. But at any rate, I think I just need to make sure that I am making sure that my paste is the right consistency before I start working with it. Here I'm all excited because it actually worked really well. My understanding is that it should be the consistency of yogurt, and I know that some of my paste has been drier than that, so operator error for sure. So now I'm just going to repeat the same process for my other two stars, and I'm going to get both of these ready before I do the cadet blue paste because I'm going to do them both the same color, and I figured it was more efficient to get them both prepared, and then I could do the paste on both of them at the same time. So I got them all set and the transfers applied, and now coming in with my cadet blue with my little squeegee thingy. Again, just trying to make sure that I'm working quickly. This was a brand new jar, so it was a really great consistency. I didn't have to worry about it being too thick, and so I felt comfortable just doing the whole star and then pulling the transfer back up. And look at how fun that is. It was a little bit, I was going to say sketchy. That's not the right word, but distressed looking on that USA part, but I was really okay with it. It looked really cool in my humble opinion. And then doing this one with all the little stars that are going to be knocked out. I like these transfers a lot. I think they're really cool the way that they're done, and they've got some really great designs. So peeling that up, how awesome is that? I love it. And then I could set them all up on the shelf together. Let me know what you think. DIY number 12. All right, for this project, I have a whole bunch of Easter eggs and a glass bowl from the Dollar Tree. This first pack of eggs is definitely from the Dollar Tree. I am honestly not sure where the other ones came from. They might have been from my subscriber Rose. They might have come from Michael's in a grab box. I'm not sure, but they had little, what do you call them? Hangers on them that I just clipped off. They were just kind of like fishing line hangers, so you could hang them on like a little Easter tree. But I am clearly going to be just gluing them all together. I'm using the bowl as my form, and I'm doing my best to glue the eggs to each other around the bowl to create a little egg bowl. That's essentially all I'm doing. So trying to figure out where best to put the eggs to line them up as much as possible to have the least amount of gaps. as I'm going and just working my way around and around and around until I was getting a bowl shape. At one point, so right about here, I decided it was time to pick it up and try and build it up rather than working my way down. So that was what I did. I flipped it over, and now I'm just going to continue to build up the walls of my bowl. And you could make something like this super shallow, or you could make it deeper. It just depends on the shape that you want to achieve, as well as the number of eggs that you have to work with. So just gluing these all together until it's all built up. And then I'm going to take my Spanish moss, and the Spanish moss, you guys, clearly I am making a big mess because it did not want to come apart. And I've been using this in quite a number of projects. It's been lasting me quite a while. I had gotten it from the Hobby Lobby. It was something like $8, $7.99. And it was just this big bag of Spanish moss, and it's been great, but it sure does make a mess when I try to pull it apart. So now I'm just gonna tuck in my little bunnies. So you could tuck in whatever you want into this. Little flowers coming out, but that's it for this. Let me know what you think of this one. DIY number 13. Right, I have this heart-shaped wreath form. It's a, oh my goodness, words, what are they? Grapevine form. And I've got these beautiful flowers that my subscriber Rose had sent to me a while back, and I've had them in my stash, and I decided this would be a great project for some of them. I'm going to create kind of an ombre effect with the flowers. I was a little worried that they would be a little bit too large for this small little wreath frame that I have, but I think it worked out really nicely. So I'm starting out by just cutting off my little picks. I'm leaving about a 3 to 4 inch length of the stem on each of these. And I'm going to start with the ivory color at the top, and then move to the blush, and then the, I'm going to call it, I don't know, a solid pink. I don't know what else you'd call it, medium pink, and then the deeper purplish pink tone, mauve kind of color. So I am starting at the bottom with the darkest color. I only used one of those, and then I have a couple of the medium pink color, and then I'm moving on to the blush. And I'm literally just kind of pushing the stems down into the wreath form, and it was secure enough that I did not feel the need to use any hot glue at all for this project. So that makes things pretty easy. So just working my way around the wreath, and I'm trying to decide which way I want those to be facing. So I opted to go the opposite direction at this point, and then I will be creating a bow, because I did want to make a bow for this, and I was trying to figure out where I was going to put that. And I thought, you know what, it'll look perfectly natural and in a perfect place to have it kind of in the middle there. So I did have one stem sticking out a little bit there, so I just trimmed that off and decided I was going to trim these other two just because of the way that the wreath form is shaped. I thought I might have some other issues with the stems kind of going through and sticking out. So got that all set. Counting my roses, I decided I wanted to put another one up at the top, so I've got another one of the ivory. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a bow there. I pulled out this really pretty satin ribbon. It is wired, but I was a little worried that it was going to be too wide. I think this is 1.5 inches, if I'm not mistaken. It might be 2 inches, but I think it's 1.5 inches. But I created 3 loops on either side. I'm just kind of wrapping them back and forth. Yeah, just kind of any which way, really. There wasn't really a rhyme or reason. I was just trying to make sure I had 3 loops on either side. And then I will cut off a piece to create the bow part in the middle. I did leave long tails. I kind of had this vision of the tails kind of floating down from the wreath. But I'm taking that smaller piece, tying it through the middle. As soon as you tie off your bow like this, it will get a little wonky, so just be patient with yourself, and don't worry if the loops get a little weird when you first tie it off, because you can always fluff them back up again. Now, in hindsight, looking at this, I actually kind of like this a lot more than I did at the time. I When I was putting this on there, I felt like I wasn't covering up enough of the grapevine there. I felt like you were going to be able to see stuff that I didn't want seen. So I set that bow aside and I decided to make a fuller bow. And so I'm just taking a whole bunch of the ribbon and I'm going to go back and forth here. At first I was going to make a really long tail on it, and then I decided that I would do a faux tail. So I'm going back and forth until I get 6 loops on either side. And once I have all of those loops set, I'll go ahead and I'm going to notch. Actually, I'm going to cut that off first. And then I did, create another, or cut off another length of ribbon to make the tail piece. I'm not going to need that just yet, but I went ahead and cut that off. So now I'm going to cut notches for my bow, just trying to find center there, cutting notches. You don't want to cut too far into this. I cut not even 1/4 of an inch. So did that on both sides, and now I have a chenille stem that I'm wrapping around there. Before I seal that up though, I'm going to drop my ribbon in that's going to be my faux tails. So kind of right in the middle. So they were kind of like half and half on either side of the chenille stem. Hopefully that makes sense. And then I twisted the chenille stem off until that was all ready and complete. And now I'm fluffing up my bow. So I'm gonna dovetail all of my little ends here, and then I'll be ready to attach it to the wreath. So I'm just using the same chenille stem, twisting it around on my wreath until it's nice and secure, and then I'm going to bend that over and twist it some more just so that I can get it all nice and tucked away and it won't be poking at anything or anyone. And that's that. Now, I felt like this bow might be a little bit too large, so I went from not enough bow, so I thought, to way too much bow. Maybe. I don't know. I'll show you the end result on this and on what I'm going to do next. And I'll ask you to tell me which one you think is better. So at any rate, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take this. Oh, nope. First I decided I was putting another flower in there. So it needs another flower. Tucking that in. So this is really very pretty. But again, I felt like maybe it was just too much bow. So I went ahead and took that bow off, and I'm going to create a new bow. This is bow number 3, 3rd time's the charm, maybe. I've got this really pretty pink gingham or buffalo check ribbon. I didn't have a lot of it left, so I was able to create, I think it was maybe 4 loops on either side, or maybe it was 4 loops on one side and 3 on the other. I don't honestly recall. But I got that tied off. I essentially made it the same way that I did the pink bow before. And then I made a second one with my, this is a pink with white polka dot ribbon that I created a second bow with. And then once I had both of those created, just making sure everything is nice and centered, I went ahead and I tied both of them together. So I just set one on top of the other, and I used the same ties to tie a knot in each of those. And I did it twice, right? So I did with one and then the other because I didn't want anything slipping or sliding. So those are nice and secure. I went ahead and dovetailed all of those ends as well. I'm just folding them in half and holding them between my fingers to clip them, checking out what it's going to look like. I think this is definitely better. So, but let me know what you think. I don't know. I don't hate the original bow. I mean, hate is a strong word, right? I don't dislike the original bow, but I don't know. This is very different, right? So one is probably a little bit more romantic, and this one is probably a little bit more country chic. I don't really know, but let me know which one you think is better. DIY number 14. All right, I have some more supplies from the Dollar Tree, that little Mary sign, and then these little wooden squares. I was debating which I wanted to use. So in the meantime, I got these 2 frames, and here I'm like, ooh, what else could I do with these? I was thinking, oh, I've got 4 of them in my stash. Maybe I can make a cross. But I digress. So I'm just trying to figure out whether I want to use that Mary sign as a base or the wooden little wooden square. The square was just a little too small, so I ended up setting that aside. But in the meantime, I'm using my pliers to pull out the anchors for the back of the frame. Now, if you want to use the back of the frame, you don't want to pull those out. You just bend them up, pull out the back, put in your photo, and then put everything back together again. But I am not interested in using the backs of these for this project, and I don't want those little tabs in there, so that's why I'm pulling them out. And they come out really pretty easily if you just kind of wiggle them a little. They really just pull right out. So once I had that done, I am ready to secure my glass into the frame. So I'm just going to run a bead of hot glue inside the ledge, along that lip that holds the glass, and just making sure that I've got a little bit all the way around, but not too much because I don't want it to ooze out all over everything, and tucked my glass down in there. And then that's going to cool almost instantly with the glass for whatever reason. I guess because it pulls more of the cooler air out of I don't know. I always find glass and metals, they are always cooler than other materials. But once I had this all set, I am ready to adhere my frames to the base. Now, you can certainly paint the base. I considered painting it, but I thought it was such a pretty design. It has the buffalo check along the edges of it. It's got the Mary on the top of it there. I opted to leave it. And I decided I was going to lean into the red and black theme as far as the rest of the project went. So I'm just getting my frames lined up. I'm making sure that they are, my goodness, what is the word I'm looking for? Flush with the sides of the base. And then I was ready to go ahead and create something for the top of it. So I'm going to go into my stash and grab out my tongue depressors. I mean, they call them paint stirrers, but they're like tongue depressors, or maybe they're a little bit larger than tongue depressors. But I'm going to be using these to create a little bit of a roof to make kind of a lantern / little house situation. Now, I thought about using my antique wax for this, but again, I decided I wanted to lean into the black and red. So I'm using a baby wipe to, as opposed to whitewashing, I'm blackwashing this. I don't know if that's really the term, but it's the same kind of idea. I'm really just staining these with the black chalk paint using a baby wipe. So the baby wipe just helps to thin out that paint. And just helps it create like a stain, and they dry super quick also. So once I had all of those done, I am going to go ahead and start applying them with my hot glue. Just get that lined up. A little bit goes a long way with this. And then I will layer them. So I'm overlapping them just slightly. So I definitely want to start at the bottom, work my way up to the top, overlapping each of them as I go. I thought I was going to need 6 on each side. I ended up only needing 5. I could have done 6 if I had overlapped them a little bit more, but it's just the way that it worked out. So once I had them done, and I did this on the other side as well, but I did go in and just add a little bit of extra hot glue along the edge there so that it was just given a little bit more support. So now along the top, I have some picks from my stash that I am going to go ahead and apply to the top. Here I've got my red berries with the greenery. It has little flakes of snow in it, which were falling on my roof, and I thought that it actually added something really sweet. it clearly is going to be able to just be brushed off at some point, but I left it on there for the time being. And then I had that buffalo check red and black flower with the gold. It was perfect. It was like it was made to go with that Mary sign. So tuck that on there, and that is it for this one. Let me know what you think. DIY number 15. Okay, this is, I think that used to be a candle, or I'm not sure where I got it. It could have come from the Dollar Tree, but I think it was an old candle, from an old candle. I have my olive oil, I have a thing of water there, I've got a bunch of little Christmas doodads that I am going to attempt to use. I had a feeling some of these were going to float in water, and so I wasn't really sure what was going to work. I've got these red glass beads that I knew would clearly sink to the bottom, but I was trying to go with things that were a little bit heavier in hopes that they would sink and not float. So I am going to cut down some of this little evergreen and just try and make sure that it's going to fit in there. I want to make sure that everything is going to remain at least an inch below the top of the vase. That is my goal. I'm probably more like an inch and a half, because I want to make sure that it's not going to interfere with what I'm doing at the top of the vase. Now, this is something that I had seen online a few months ago. My goodness, excuse me, I can't stop yawning. I'm always recording this late at night because it's really the only time I have to do my voiceovers, so forgive me. But I'd seen this online a few months ago, and I thought it was such a neat idea. Essentially, we are going to be creating an oil candle. So I've got my little decorations in here, and you can put anything that you want in there as long as it won't float. But I'm filling this up with water. I ran out of water in there, so I had to go get more. I'm leaving about an inch, only filling it so that it comes to about an inch from the top. Now I'm going to start pulling things out that are floating, because they're floating big time and sticking up above the water. Yeah. In hindsight, I probably could have left them, because we're going to have kind of a barrier that you'll see in a minute. But this is a Dollar Tree candle. It came, I think they were 4 or 5 to a box. They're like emergency candles, and I literally just bent it in half. It was weird, because normally candles, in my experience, snap. This one was bending. It was strange, but I was able to break the candle in the middle, and then I just literally pulled the wick out of it. So if you have wicks, you can use them, without having to destroy a candle to get to them. But I then tied a knot in it about an inch from one end. Now I am struggling with this plastic container because I want the base out of there. I finally realized the best way to do it was getting my piercing tool. So I'm poking a bunch of little holes along the edge, kind of all in a row. And that gave me a place where I could stick my scissors in there and cut that out. Just be real careful when you're doing this, because you don't want to end up cutting yourself by accident. I was doing things that were not real safe that I didn't include on the camera, but just be careful. So now I'm just trimming down that base, and it ended up being all for naught, because I decided to stick it in there and make sure that it was going to float, and it sank immediately. So I was like, oh no. And then of course it disrupted everything that had not yet been floating and caused other things to float. So goodness, the struggle is real sometimes, I promise. So I ended up pulling a few other pieces out. And then I went back to my little plastic bottle to see if I could salvage this by using a different piece of it. So the sides of this are a little thinner. So this does end up floating for me. I'll show you in just a second. But it is curved, so I had to kind of work with it and curve it in the opposite direction. And here I'm showing you that it actually is going to float, drying it off. But you just want to make sure you get it as flat as possible. So I placed it on my scissors because I'm trying to poke a hole right in the middle of it. Just making sure my hole is big enough that I can put my wick through it. Now I started putting it up from the bottom and then realized I want to have it drop down from the top. So I want my knot at the top. That's going to keep the wick from falling down into the jar, leaving the tail in the water. And now it's time for my olive oil. So I'm just gonna pour my olive oil right over that plastic barrier. And that's why I was saying that I could probably have left some things that were gonna float up to the top, because they wouldn't have passed that. Now, just for fun, I decided to put some green glitter in the top. My olive oil had a bit of a greenish tinge, but it was really more yellow. So I decided, let's put some green glitter in there. If I had to do it again, would I do it again? I don't know. It's fine, but it does look a little weird to me. So anyway, I went ahead and lit it up, and y'all, I was able to let this burn while I continued to craft for a couple of hours, and it hadn't even made a dent in the olive oil from what I could tell. So I think this would burn for a good long time, and I'm really excited about how it looks. But take a look at the final reveal picture here and let me know what you think of this one. DIY number 16. A piece of wood. This is just a scrap from my stash. It's a 1x2 that I picked up at the Home Depot a while back, and I am just gonna just checking the length of it there. It's about 5 inches. So I'm going to cut that first piece 5 inches, and then I'm going to cut a second piece about a 1/2 inch longer, so about 5.5 inches. And you might have seen that there was some black ink, like a stamp that they put on the wood. So I'm going to sand all of my ends to make sure that they can stand up properly on their own. And then I'll also sand off that black ink in just a moment. And now I had that other piece, and it occurred to me when I started trying to sand this, I was like, oh, I wonder if that other piece will work. It would if I cut it again, and I didn't feel like cutting down another piece. So I'd rather keep that in my stash in case I need it for something else. So I sanded that all down, and once I had it the way I wanted it, I'm just making sure that they're going to stand up next to each other nice and tall without leaning away from each other, because I want these to be kind of snug against each other. And now I have from the Dollar Tree these wooden stickers. I'm going to paint this one little heart white. You can see in the past I clearly have painted some of these hearts red, but this one I want white. So I'm going to paint that and set it aside to dry. And now I've got my other two pieces. This is Imperial Red that I'm using again. And I'm going to grab a baby wipe, and I'm going to try to do a red wash, so to speak. But this red is highly, highly pigmented. So it was going on really dark, which is fine and good. It was just a little bit of this went a long way. So just trying to get this on here without making a complete mess of my fingers. And once I had it covered, I'm going to open up. You're going to see me flip the baby wipe here, and I'm just going over it to kind of try to remove some of that excess paint so that it's more of a wash than a complete thick paint job. Hopefully I'm making sense. Now this pink is a pale pink. I had blended, I think it's called Victorian. The pink that I have in my stash, it's also by Home Decor. It's a little darker. And I had blended this a while back. This has been sitting in my stash. I was really happy to see it hadn't dried out. I had just added some water back into it to get it to the consistency that I want. And I'm doing a wash with this as well with a new baby wipe. I would say this is probably about the color of ballet slipper. I don't have ballet slipper, so I'm not sure, but you can mix paints to whatever color, tone, whatever it is that makes your heart happy. So there's really unlimited potential with the various paint colors you can come up with. So now I have my jute cord. I had picked this up a while back from Walmart. I'm going to lay these down now. Notice I kept those with the base really I didn't want it to move, right? I want to make sure this is going to be able to stand up again once I set it back down. So if you're going to pick it up and lay it down to work with it the way that I did, you just want to make sure that it doesn't slide at all, that the bottom stays lined up. And so I just wrapped my jute cord around there a few times. As you saw, I had secured it with a little bit of hot glue at the start. And now I'm going to add a little bit of hot glue there in the center. I'm doing all of my ends in the center here because I'm going to be covering that up with our little white heart that is now dry. So I'm tucking that on there, and it was kind of like falling forward, so to speak. So I'm going to grab my glue gun again in a second and tuck some hot glue. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of out of frame there, but I just put some hot glue behind it along the jute cord, and I am going to press it down. I keep blowing on it, which is why I keep pulling it out of frame, trying to get it to cool. And then also while I was doing that, I noticed that my heart, the edges of it weren't all white. At the time, I had not intended to make them white, but I noticed that I'd had some paint that went over the one edge. So yeah, coming back in with a little tiny paintbrush. I do recommend doing this before you put it on your project, because I'm having to try not to get it on the jute cord here. I think I got a little teeny bit on there, but it was fine. It was really good. And this ended up turning out so cute. All right, once I have that done, I have a couple of wooden beads that I'm going to place on the top. These are going to be their little heads. I saw this on, I think it was on Pinterest. That's what inspired me to do this. So mine's a little bit different, but just added some hot glue in there, and I'm going to secure their little heads. And now when I did this, I'm like, you know what, but I don't like that hole on the top. The hole was really bothering me. And so I could leave it like this and then let it be all done, but I didn't like the holes. So what I'm going to do is grab my jute cord again. I'm putting some hot glue down inside that little hole, and I'm going to push my little jute cord down inside there. I'm kind of twisting it to help get it inside of there and get it secured. I'm going to cut off a length of that. I would say it was probably 6 or 8 inches that I cut for this particular one. And I'm just going to wrap it around the top of her little head. We're going to create some hair here. And I wrapped it a few times until I got it to where I thought it was low enough. And then I'm going to create like a little ponytail. And I was trying to figure out how best to do the ponytail. You can see me anchoring it down with some more hot glue here. And finally, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to tie a little knot in my jute cord here. So I'm going to tie a regular little simple knot here and secure it down close to the bead, so close to her head. Just getting that tight. And then I'm going to grab my hot glue again and put a little bit of... Sorry guys, the dogs are barking. I think Elena just got home from work. But just putting some hot glue there to secure it so it stays flat there. And now I am going to unravel the end of that jute cord and just kind of get it frayed to create her little hair. And just being gentle here because I don't want to break all of the little fibers, and just pulling all of that apart to create, again, her little hair. And now we have squeaky doors in the background, so I apologize for the background noise. But I'm gonna go ahead and get all of that together and trying to get it to lay kind of a little bit flat. It was kind of sticking straight out there for a little bit. So pulling that down and gonna trim off the ends, and now she's got her little ponytail, but again, it was kind of sticking straight out. So I'm gonna use a little bit more hot glue here in a second, just to get it to lay a little bit more like I want it. So teeny tiny bit of hot glue there, laying those fibers down a little bit, and then she'll be set. So doing the same thing with his little head, I'm gonna tuck some jute cord down inside of there, and using a little skewer from another project to tuck it down inside, and then I'll wrap it around his little head as well. For his, clearly we're not making him a ponytail, so I didn't need quite as much jute cord. I cut off maybe a 4 to 5 inch length of it, And I'm just going to wrap this around and around until I get that all situated. And he's got a little head of hair as well, using a little bit of hot glue. I do have my hot glue on my low setting so that I am less likely to burn myself. You still want to be careful even when it's on the low setting. But I work with this a lot, and I'm usually okay with the low setting, me personally, and I'm just using my fingernails to kind of get the excess glue out of there. I am still being very careful because I can still burn myself on the low setting, just not nearly as badly as with the high setting. So I'm really enjoying the lower setting because it also cools faster, and I can work with it a little bit faster. So just trimmed off some of those excess fibers that were sticking out, and that's it. And I think this is so sweet. DIY number 17.
All right, this is a frame from the Dollar Tree, and as you can see, it will hold about 7 pictures. We are going to be taking out that mat. I'll save it for another project for another day. Now, the backing on this is cardboard, and I've used these recently. You might have seen me securing them with some hot glue. I just want to make sure that they're not going to pull out and have my frame go crashing to the floor at any point. Putting down some parchment paper because it will not stick to the parchment paper, and that's enabling me to smooth it out so I won't have any bulk behind the frame, so that it won't be visible, so to speak. So I am popping out the glass. I'm going to set that aside for right now, and I am going to be painting the frame. I've got those little tabs still upright, so it's kind of lifting that frame up off. You can see how that didn't stick. I'm going to reuse my parchment paper, but it's kind of lifting the frame up off of the surface and makes it easier for me to paint it, honestly. This is Ocean chalk paint. I think this one is by Waverly. It's either Waverly or Home Decor. I'm sorry, you probably saw it better than I did while I'm doing this voiceover. But there I go, dropping the whole frame there. But you can see I am painting both sides of it. I just want to make sure that everything is nicely coated. I absolutely love this shade of blue. I think it is gorgeous. But going ahead and getting my glass prepped now. I've got some parchment paper down again, and I've got a microfiber cloth and some alcohol. This is rubbing alcohol. I believe it's 91% isopropyl alcohol. And I'm just going to clean my glass. I want to make sure that it is smudge free and nice and clean. And then I'm going to be pulling out my alcohol inks. So just getting those out of my drawer, and I'm going to pull out a bunch of different shades of blue and a couple of greens, as well as a shade that was as close as I could get in my pack of paints to like a sand color. So it was, I think this one was called Mango. It was more of an orangey, like a light orange, but it was the closest I could get. This is all meant for inspiration. It is clearly going to be abstract, but I am just applying some of the alcohol ink to that bottom area and letting it do its thing, letting it work its magic. Now I did go back and grab some, I think this one's called Coffee. And it's just a brown. I just wanted to add a little bit more dimension to the sand color, if you will. Then I will come in with my blues, and I'm just going to go ahead and layer them, or not really even layering them, but kind of using a stripe kind of, I don't know. You can see what I'm doing. I'm just applying it kind of in squigglies. This is hopefully going to kind of give the sense that we're looking at some water. You can see I've added a green there. I wasn't too sure about the green, and then went ahead and continued on with other blues. I had a turquoise, essentially any of the blues that looked remotely like water to me is what I opted to work with here. But you can choose whatever colors you want, right? This is meant to be inspirational. And you can see how I'm kind of dropping it in the middle there. And now I'm going to take a dry brush because I wasn't liking the circular pattern it's creating. And I'm really just schmussing. What on earth word was that? Smooshing it, smudging it, I don't know. Kind of drawing my dry brush very lightly through the alcohol ink and trying to get it to blend a little bit more. It's looking a bit like a hot mess right now, but trust me, I actually love the way that it turned out in the end, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'm gonna continue on with my different colors. And it's funny because as I look at this now, I almost wish that I had, after I got done with this top part, left that middle part there alone, because it almost looks to me like a mountain and some land and then the ocean in front, or a lake maybe in front, and then sky up above. But then I continued to work with it and I lost pretty quickly that illusion. I wasn't seeing that full picture when I was working on it. I was more of the sense that I wanted it all to be water in my head. So just something to keep in mind as you go, that other images might appear, and be open-minded as you step back and take a look at your pictures. This is white alcohol ink that I pulled out because here I'm thinking about perhaps adding in the foam, and this is where I started adding, well, I continued to add the white across, but I still think it turned out really nice. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this and see if it's something you think you might attempt sometime. All right, so I set that aside to dry, and while it's drying, I am just taking, this is plain white paper. I've just got these large sheets that my husband had given me. I'm not sure where he got them from, but I cut down a couple of layers to use as the backing inside my frame. So putting my frame back together, it's all dry now. I've got to drop my glass in there. There we go. The alcohol ink is going to be on the inside so that it's protected. And then I will set my white paper in there along with the frame backing, and I'll be able to get that all sealed up. And that is it. But I love this. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 18. For this project, I have a wreath form from the Dollar Tree. I also have some, I wanted to say canvas. It's not canvas. It is burlap. I'm going to call it ribbon for lack of a better term, but it's probably about 4 inches wide, maybe 6. But I had the red, and then I also have a spool of that kind of natural color. It's more like a creamy off-white, I suppose. And I also have my Kirkland ribbon there on the side, but I was trying to figure out how large I wanted to make these little loops that will be quasi bows. And I thought, it's about 18 inches, but let me measure it. And you know what? It was exactly 18 inches. So I am just going to cut a whole bunch of strips of my red and my white. As much as I can get out of what I have is what I'm going to be cutting down and using. I think I ended up with 9 strips of the red, and I think it was 5 of the off-white. If I had more, I would have used more, but this was all I had in my stash. And then I grabbed a piece of wire that was left over in my stash. This is something I think I pulled off of chicken wire, so it was honestly trash, for lack of a better term. But I decided to save it because I figured I might be able to use it on something, and here we go. So I am just pretty much making little loop bows, so to speak. So making it a loop, pinching it in the middle, and then tying it off with my wire. I thought about using chenille stems, but I didn't know how that would look. I don't know. It probably would have been fine to use the chenille stems, but I opted to use the wire instead. So I did that with all of my strips, and now I'm going to go to the wreath form and start applying them to the wreath form. And I'm tucking the two ends of the wire through the form around the two center wires, so to speak. And then I just twisted that around and got it nice and secure. And then I alternated that back and forth. I'm doing the same exact thing with my off-white bow. And I will continue to do that all the way around the wreath form, just alternating them. Now, because I had extra of the red, once I got to the end with the red, I went ahead and just doubled up on my red bows at either end. And like I said, if I had had more of the burlap to work with, I would have gone further around. I would have made sure that I only had a quarter of the form left, but this was the best that I could do with what I had. So I'm going to be filling the rest of it in with my blue ribbon. And I love this blue and silver. And I know, oh, right there, you probably could see it's got kind of a sparkle to it with the silver that runs through in, I'm going to call it little stars for, you know, they're just little specks of silver running through it. And it is my take on stars for this wreath that we're putting together. I did the same thing with the blue and silver ribbon as I had done with the burlap. And now I'm just going to go ahead and attach it the same way that I did with the burlap. This is just going to be with the bows. One thing I did notice as I was applying the bows, and you're going to see me fluffing it up in a minute, instead of kind of overlapping slightly like I did with the burlap, I ended up kind of twisting them. Here you can see me kind of twisting some of them around and just making it a little fuller. So there you go. I just did that until I had the whole wreath form filled. So as you can see, I wish that I had just had maybe a quarter of that done with the blue, but I still think it came out really pretty. Here I'm just trimming off some of the excess wire. You want to leave some of it because you don't want the things to come unraveled, but I didn't want a lot of it sticking out. And now I am covering up the back with this burlap ribbon. This is also a Kirkland ribbon from Costco, but you can use whatever you have in your stash. And I just wanted to have something that was going to cover up the wires so that they weren't going to scratch whatever surface this got hung on, but then also it would be nice and neat and finished. So I'm just trying to figure out how I want to do this, and I ended up kind of folding it over itself and working my way around the wreath form that way. So I'm putting a little tiny bit of glue on the form itself to anchor the ribbon, and then I'm going to just fold the ribbon over itself and attach it like that. And that's giving me the ability to curve the ribbon around the form without it bunching funny. So if you think about it, I mean, the form is circular, right? And the ribbon isn't going to just automatically twist or curve, I should say. So this was a way for me to kind of double up the ribbon to protect from the pointy, sticky wires and finish it off, and also allow myself to get that curve as I went. But you could certainly use other things. You could use felt, whatever you have in your stash to cover this up. But I love how this looks. Let me know what you think. DIY number 19. I have a bunch of yarn and some leftover foam core board that I'm going to be working with for this. I grabbed out my ruler and I'm going to be measuring off, I think I did this at about 6 inches. Now you can make this as tall and as wide as you would like. I just wanted to do it 6 inches. And I was making my letter, I'm creating letters here, block letters. So I wanted them about 6 inches tall, and I'm going to make them about 4 inches wide, with the letters being about 1.5 inches thick. So creating block letters, I was just making sure that it was the same thickness all the way down there. I'm creating an L, and then I will go ahead and do an O. Now, because they're block letters, I'm also just making sure I'm measuring them all off the same. But because they're block letters, I can run my letters right up against each other here because I'm going to be cutting them out, and that way I'm not wasting any of the foam core board either. Now, once I had my L and my O done, I'm not going to show you all of that, but I'm going to show you how I did my V. So I measured 1.5 inches over at the top there. Then I, at the bottom, also measured over 1.5 inches. Okay. And now I'm going to keep measuring 1.5 inches apparently just to get all of my markings ready. So everything is 1.5 inches because my letters are 1.5 inches wide. So I'm marking everything 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to be using my ruler at an angle from the top corner of the O down to that first 1.5 inch mark. And then I will do the same thing on the opposite side. And then in between there, I am going to make sure I'm at the same angle. So from the other marking 1.5 inches in down to my 1.5 inch mark down at the bottom from the other side. Hopefully, a picture speaks 1,000 words, hopefully, or 1,000,000 words. Hopefully you're understanding what I'm saying. Now, pencil's awesome because if you mess it up, you can go ahead and fix it, right? I had my middle part of my E too short there, so I just adjusted it. So now I've got this out on my self-healing mat, and I am just going to cut it all out with my razor blade. I like to score it just a little bit with my ruler, and then I go back over it because I find that I make fewer errors if I do it that way. I find personally, if I try to score through the entire thing all at once, I end up moving away from my ruler and I just end up making a mess of things. So anyway, once I have them all cut out, that's when it's time for my yarn. And I have a white yarn that I think I got that from Michael's a really long time ago. It's been on my stash for a while. The pink yarn and the gray yarn are both from the Dollar Tree. And I'm using some hot glue along the edge of the foam core. This is another reason why I like using the hot glue on the low setting, because it doesn't melt the foam core in the center there the way that it will when it's on the high setting. So it just makes it a little bit easier to work with this project. So I'm pretty much wrapping the yarn back and forth across the top there to hide the foam core board. Excuse me. And now I am going to go ahead and wrap this around and around and around my letter. I'm just making sure that I'm anchoring it with some hot glue towards the top so that it's not going to come undone. It's not going to slide up off the top over what I've got going on there. And then I'll be able to start wrapping it without the need for additional glue. Just making sure that I've got the top nice and secure. So I will just continue to wrap that around and around, making sure that all of the foam core board is completely covered and hidden, and I'll work my way down the letter. So once I get to about what I'm considering a third of the way through my entire project, because I'm going to have these letters stacked on top of each other, I'm trimming off the white yarn. I'll go ahead and anchor that with a little bit of hot glue. It doesn't need a lot, just a little bit. Then I'll put some more down for the next color. I'm going to go with pink next. It's kind of like a dusty rose, I'm going to call it. And then I'll start wrapping from there. And here I don't need a lot of hot glue because the white yarn is going to keep that in place. Now when I get down to the bottom, I'm going to need a lot more hot glue. Just as I did at the top, I'm going to need to make sure I'm securing the bottom. So right here, as I get to the L, the part of the L that sticks out, I'm going to do the same thing I did at the top. I'm going to use some hot glue here. I'm going to wrap my yarn, not wrap it, but lay my yarn down one end, anchor it down that end, and then I'm going to wrap it back up the other way so that it's completely covering the foam core. Because this particular yarn, now if you use a thicker yarn, you won't need to go back and forth like that, but because this yarn is pretty skinny, it's called it's a worsted weight yarn. So because it is skinny, it is not wide enough to cover the foam core board in one fell swoop. That's why I'm having to go back and forth over that. If you use a wider yarn, then you won't have that same issue. And a wider yarn might actually be really fun and pretty. But I'm gonna continue to wrap my way all the way down, and then I will anchor it with some hot glue. So once I have that all anchored, I'm going to go back and forth across the bottom the same way that I did at the top, and just make sure that the entire thing is completely covered and hidden. So you can see me anchoring it down, and I probably could have edited some of this out, but just in case you want to see this again, I'm going to run hot glue right along the foam core there, and then I'm a little out of frame, of course, now, but I'm going to wrap it back and forth along the bottom there just to make sure everything is nice and hidden. And then I'll trim it off. I think I do actually end up putting a little bit more hot glue down just to make sure that my end is anchored. Yep, just a little bit there, tucking it down in between the other strands, and I am good with my L. And then when I get to my V, I'm going to start with the dusty rose and work my way down the V. First with the dusty rose, and then I will be transitioning over to the gray. So I'm going to continue to do the same thing that I did before, and I'm going to be speeding through this in just a minute here, because I know this is probably already getting a little bit old watching me wrap this. But it's giving it kind of an ombre effect. So I did see this on Pinterest, so in completely different colors, but I thought it was so cute, and I was inspired to give it a go. I don't know what that particular piece was made from. I feel like it might have been thicker, but I am making this as a wall hanging, and so I thought the foam core board would work quite nicely. Now, if you are new to my channel, welcome. If you have not already subscribed, I hope that you'll consider doing that and hitting that bell so that you get notified whenever I upload a new video. And if you have been subscribed to my channel, thank you. I sincerely appreciate you. I hope that you all know how much I love hearing from you and all of your comments. And this has been such a wonderful journey, and I'm looking forward to everything that's to come now that we're starting 2023. But as you can see here, I've transitioned over to the gray, and I'm working my way down to that V part. Once I hit that V area, I'm going to stop on the one side, and I'm going to wrap the other part of my V. And once I had that done, I started wrapping around the whole thing. I just continued on. But instead of using the hot glue, I decided I was going to use my double-sided tape from the Dollar Tree for this, because I need to have more going on here. And the reason being that the V, instead of getting wider, obviously it's getting thinner. And as it gets more narrow, the yarn wants to slide, right? So I needed something that was going to grab the yarn and keep it from sliding. With the other letters where there's no angle, all of my other letters have straight lines. There was no, the yarn wasn't going to slide on me. It was all going to be consistent. So now I'm working on the E, clearly. I did end up going too far with the E. Yeah, I ended up going too far, and I had to undo it and and go back. So, but you know what? That happens in crafting sometimes. I also realized that I had started, oh, no, I think it was the O, where I had started with the wrong color, and I ended up having to flip it upside down, which worked out well too. But anyway, here they are all wrapped, and so now I'm going to connect them together. So in order to do that, I'm going to flip them upside down, trying to figure out how I want to piece them together. I grabbed some skewers out of my stash from a project that I did, I think it was last week. I had pulled these off of some hearts, and so now I'm going to repurpose them. But cutting them down, I'm cutting these at an angle to try to give a sharp end to the part that I'm cutting. So they're pointy. I'm using the pointy part from the skewer, but then also creating another pointy part. And I'm going to kind of jab these into the foam core and do that on both sides so that they kind of all are kind of meshed together here. Now, it was a little bit more challenging than I thought it might be. I ultimately ended up taking out my paper piercing tool and used that to create holes. Highly recommend starting with that because then you won't have to struggle quite as much as I did in the beginning as I was first trying to get this in here. My thought was, well, it's foam core, it's soft and you could pierce it. And I thought that these wooden skewers would be sufficient, but with the hot glue involved and the yarn, I found it easier once I started using my piercing tool. So just a quick little tip on that. I'm getting these all anchored together, making sure that they are a good length so that they're not going to end up going through the other side of the letter, especially with the V, with it being at an angle. I want to make sure that it all stays within the project, right? And got those secured. And then I'm also going to use some smaller pieces to attach the L to the O and the V to the E. And I'll just cut those down and do the same thing. And it was at this point in just a moment that I ended up getting out my piercing tool. For whatever reason, this part was harder. So working on that now, getting this all lined up. And there's the piercing tool, you can see. Once I had them all lined up, this was something, you guys. All right, pushing it together. All right, you know, I guess I decided to show you a little bit of the struggle so that you don't ever feel like I am doing things like a whiz, because clearly I had to pull that out a little bit. It got pushed a little too far in, grabbed my pliers, back with the piercing tool. I promise you guys it's coming together here this time. There we go. All right, so now it's all mushed together. Just to make it a little bit more secure, I did come in with some hot glue here in just a second. So on the back side of it, I'm kind of holding it together, securing it with some hot glue just to make sure that it's extra secure and not going to come apart on me. I just used a little bit anywhere I had a seam. Alrighty, now I took 3 strands of the pink yarn. It doesn't really matter which color you use, but I went ahead and I braided it down for 3 separate lengths, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. So I got it to one length and I went ahead and knotted it, and then I'm going to do another knot. I'm going to knot it again after a little bit of a space, and then I'm going to braid it some more. And then I did it a 3rd time. Now, the reason I did it 3 times, I thought I wanted to have a hanger just in the middle between the L and the O, the bases of the L and the O. But then I was thinking, you know what? It might end up leaning forward off the wall. So I figured I better have hooks for the top of the L and the top of the O also as an option. You can do whatever your heart desires. If you want to just put them at the top, I think that's perfectly fine. I did test it out and it does lean forward a little bit when I use just the one in the very middle. It probably also depends on how tight you have your little hanger as well. I imagine that probably makes a difference. So whatever works for you, but I have options here for myself. I did notice also afterwards that I had my V on backwards. And by backwards, I know the V is the same forward and back, but the good side of my yarn was facing the back, but that's all right. It's still super cute. Let me know what you think. DIY number 20, This is a little wood oval from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to go ahead and get the sticker off the back of it, and then I'm going to give it a coat of Adirondack white chalk paint. I love this chalk paint, but I'm painting the entire thing, both sides. And once I had that done, I am going to take my, once it's dry, I should say, I'm taking some sanding paper and I'm just going to give it a good sanding along all the edges, just distressing it a little bit, roughing it up. I'm actually smoothing out some of it too because I hadn't sanded it before, but also sanding part of the surface so that I'm revealing a little bit of the wood underneath. Now I have a pencil and I'm going to just draw our little gnome friend on here. I saw a sign, I think it was at the Home Depot, and it had 3 little gnomes and it said something about hugs and kisses and Valentine's wishes. And I don't know, I love the little gnomes. I think they're so cute. So I figured I would draw a little gnome on here and then we're going to paint our little friend. So the great thing about pencil is you can erase it if you don't like what you've done. Just be patient with yourself. You can do this. You absolutely can do this. If I can do this, you can do this. It's a really simple little figure. You can see that I've just drawn right over all of my other markings. So like you can see his beard through the heart right now, that sort of thing. It's pencil, right? You can erase it, but then I'm also going to be using opaque paint, which is going to completely cover it. Just for my own sanity, I did erase some of the pencil marks so that I knew better where I wanted to be putting my paint if I wasn't paying 100% attention, which has been known to happen. So this is a light pink that I had mixed some time back, and I've had it in my stash. I think it was, I want to say the darker pink I have is called Vintage Victorian, I think is what it's called, by Home Decor. And I mixed it with white just to lighten it up. It's probably closest to ballet slipper. So if you have ballet slipper and you're looking for a close match, that's probably what you'd want to use. But it's just a nice light pink. I'm filling in with a small flat brush. I felt that would give me the most control over what I was doing here. And again, if you go out of the lines, it's paint. You can paint over it, right? That was my thought. I'm just taking my time. This is sped up about 2.5 times, so keep that in mind. I'm not moving nearly as fast as it looks because the video is sped up just for the sake of time. So coming in with an even smaller brush with my red paint because I knew I had smaller areas that I needed to be able to get into. And so I am just making my way along those edges and taking my time. I did show more of painting the gnome. I don't know, for whatever reason, I just find it very satisfying to watch, but I also thought you might appreciate being able to see how I was doing this. It was something I was nervous about at first. I honestly didn't think that my hand was going to be steady enough to do this, but it honestly ended up not being as difficult as I had imagined that it would be. Perhaps because I had penciled in my design first, I'm not really sure, but it actually, it was easier than I thought it was going to be. But just taking my time, spinning the oval around so that I can get a good angle to make sure that I can kind of line up my paintbrush with those edges, and just drawing the paintbrush right along my pencil line and smoothing out all of my lines as I go. I did end up giving it a second coat in most areas. And here you see I'm kind of leaving a gap up at his shoulder because I at this point I was worried about how I was going to differentiate between his hat and his body, and then his arms and his body. You know, I was like, how am I going to do this? So I ended up bumping out some elbows for him. So you can see on the right, I kind of put a bump. On the left, it doesn't have it yet. I'm going to make a bump on the left too, just to kind of help differentiate his arms. But then I also, I was doing this and thinking about how I wanted it to be differentiated, I decided I was going to outline it in black. So at that point, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to outline it in black. I can go ahead and, you know, paint the rest of his body right up to the hat, and I'm not going to need to worry about, you know, whether the hat looks like it's part of his body. And the black actually ended up making it pop really nicely too. So I'm just going to continue to paint the rest of his little body until I have that all filled in. But let me know what you are thinking about this little guy. I just, like I said, I think the gnomes are absolutely adorable. And I think this little guy is super cute as well. So just running my paintbrush right along the edge of the heart there. And you know what? If you overlap it a little bit, it's perfectly fine, right? I think I did kind of go up right onto the pink a little bit just to make sure that I didn't have any gaps and it was nice and cohesive. So then once my little red hat was dry, I came back in with some of the pink again. And I just painted a whole bunch of little hearts on his hat. I felt like it was all just a little too monotone. I thought about maybe making some stripes on his little body. I don't know, would you call that a jacket? Or what do gnomes wear? Is it like a smock? I have no idea. So anyway, I thought about painting some stripes on him, but then I decided I would just do the hearts, and I thought it turned out cute. So now I am using cashew. I believe this is also by Home Decor, cashew chalk paint. It's kind of like a light beige tone, and I used that for his nose as well as for his little hands. I don't know if he's wearing mittens or not, but if he's wearing mittens, they're the same color as his nose. So, but as you can see, all of these paints are completely covering up the pencil marks. So you don't need to worry about the pencil lines if you're using an opaque paint, because the paint will go ahead and completely hide the pencil. So as long as you just go over the outer edge of those pencil lines, you're going to be good to go. I love this little guy so much. So I've got the cashew there, and then this is just the regular black chalk paint, and I'm using a tiny brush for this as well. Now, you could use your brush to do the outline if you would like. I did not. I used a black Sharpie because I did not trust myself to be able to do the line with the paintbrush. I was concerned that I would not be able to get a super straight line, or the paint would fade on me and I'd have to go back over it and I would have globs, and I did not trust myself. So I did use a black Sharpie. And, you know, along those lines, as you're painting your gnome, if you have paint markers or paint pens and you want to use something like that instead of a brush, by all means. I considered using my paint markers for this, but then ultimately decided I really wanted to try and do it with the brush, because my paint markers are not as opaque, and I thought I'd get better coverage if I were to use my chalk paint. So that was why I opted to do it the way that I did. And with the white here that I went over with the beard, I'm doing his little puffball on the end of his hat. I kind of gave it a little bit of texture, like I made the paint a little thicker. But here you can see I'm coming in with my Sharpie now that everything is dry. You definitely want to make sure that everything is dry before you do this. I'm just coming in and I am tracing all of the edges. Would you call it edges? But I thought that this really made it pop nicely. I was at first a little afraid when I first thought about doing it. I was like, I don't know if it's gonna, you know, enhance him. I think it definitely enhanced him. So I was not bothered by the black outlining at all. Making sure that I get his beard as well here in a minute. I think right there I had a little bit of the red paint that had not quite dried, and so it kind of ended up smushing a little bit, so I was trying to fix that. And again, just turning him in whichever direction I need to be able to get the angle. There, I've got his beard. And then work on his hat. And I even outlined the little hearts also, which gave them more definition. And you'll see that in just a minute. But I was really proud of myself with this little guy. I don't do a lot of drawing per se. And yeah, I mean, I had an image in my head as to what I wanted this little guy to look like. And I pretty much hit the mark on what I was hoping to achieve. So like I said, I was kind of proud of myself on this one. So coming in and outlining all of the hearts. Again, I'm leaving this in because I just find it very soothing and satisfying, and I hope that you're enjoying this as well. But feel free to fast forward a little bit if you've had enough of watching me outline and paint here. And then just his little nose, and he is all done. I think he's adorable. So this is done except for a little hanger. I have these hangers that I just found when cleaning out my office. So I am going to go ahead and screw them into the back. I did not drill a pilot hole or anything. I wasn't sure how easy this was going to be, but it was actually super easy, like almost too easy. But I went ahead and screwed it almost all the way in. I left it a little bit loose so that I could adjust the little saw blade thing, whatever that is. I don't know what you call this kind of hanger, but I wanted to be able to adjust it a little bit. And here it is. DIY number 21. All right, this has been in my stash for a while. It is from the Dollar Tree. It is like a little windmill, and I think it used to have like a welcome sign or something on the bottom, on the base of it that I'd ripped off for another project. But at any rate, I got it ready with my parchment paper underneath for painting. This is Ocean, my Crimson, and my Adirondack white chalk paint. The first thing I'm going to do is paint 2 of these blades. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but that's what I'm going to call it, with the Ocean. And then I'm going to do 2 with the red, but I'm going to alternate the red ones, leaving one in between each. And then those last 2, I'm going to paint them white. And I did multiple coats of paint for a couple of the colors at least, because they were a little bit more transparent. My blue was the most opaque, so it needed the least amount of paint, but the red was surprisingly translucent. So I did as many coats as was necessary to make sure it was trimmed up, or not trimmed up, but covered. And then I was just showing you this teeny little paintbrush that I was going to use to attempt to paint stars on my blue blades. I was wishing I had a white paint marker, but my white paint markers that I had are out of paint, so that wasn't an option. Then I was also wishing I had like a stencil, which I think I did have because I end up using it later, and it probably would have worked for this, but I'd forgotten at this point that I had it, or stickers or something. I didn't feel like pulling out my Cricut, or I probably should have done that, but at any rate, I attempted little white stars. They're cute. They're whimsical, right? They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but you get the idea. And then I went ahead and also painted a star in the middle of the little windmill. I was having a really hard time getting it to be even, so I kept going around and adding more paint to it to try to get it not to be lopsided, and it looked pretty good in the end. And so now I have from my stash this little America sign. I've had this for a couple of years at least, I think. And I'm just going to try to use that wire hanger that's on it to wrap it around the base of this to attach it here. I was having a really hard time with the wire. It did not want to flex. It didn't want to cooperate. It kept wanting to spring back to its original position. So I ended up anchoring it with some hot glue. I'm going to flip it over here in just a second and you'll see. So I got it wrapped around there as well as I could, and then just using a whole bunch of hot glue anywhere there was a meeting of the minds, so to speak. So now you can see that's a kind of an off-white white. I opted to go ahead and paint over it with my Adirondack white paint. The other option that I had would have been to get out my antique wax by Waverly, and I could have gone over my blades with that to dinge everything up a little bit to get it to match, but I don't know, there was something about the bright white that was really making me happy. So this was the way that I opted to do it. And that was it. Let me know what you think of this piece. DIY number 22. All right, I have another gift bag also from the Hobby Lobby. It was also a pack of two for $2.99, but again, I got them on sale. I wish I could remember if it was 60% or 70% off. I can't remember at this point. But I also have this Dollar Tree bamboo cutting board that I'm going to be using as my little sign. I was trying to decide which direction I wanted this to go, and it took me a while to decide, but I just decided I was going to start the project and figure it out as I went. So similar to the other little sign project, I was just kind of eyeballing it and figuring out where I wanted it trimmed down and kind of trimming away it more and more as I went. For this one, I did decide I was going to try to make the lines a little bit sharper because I was not planning on using the sanding block like I did with the first one. Here I am again trying to figure out which direction I'm going to go in. I did ultimately decide to do it horizontal like this, so landscape, I guess you would say. So using my little board as a measuring, or you know what I'm talking about. I figured out where I needed to make the cuts, and then I used my straight edge tool to do it. All right, Mod Podge again. So this time I opted to put the Mod Podge directly on the back of the paper instead of on the wood. Warning, it is going to curl up massively on you. So if I had to do it again, and especially knowing now how I finished the project, I would have put it directly on the wood. I didn't do it at first because I was still figuring out how I was going to finish the edges on either side of my little decoration here, my image. Still trying to figure out how I was going to cover up the sides. So I didn't want the glue sticking out or being on the wood piece in the event that it was going to be visible. So that's why I opted to do it this way. I obviously got it done and just trying to get it smoothed out. And the edges, again, because they were curling, I'm going to flip it upside down, and I put my Mod Podge container right on top of it again. So just need something heavy to weigh it down until it dries. Once it was dry, I grabbed out again another one of my Kirkland ribbons, and I did opt to cover up the rest of the wood there. Not necessarily because I wanted to cover the wood, but it's just the way that it turned out with the ribbon that I selected. And I also, while I originally thought that the wood would complement those pine cones in there, and I think it does a little bit, the bamboo was just a little bit yellow for my taste. I probably could have used some antique wax on it to just darken it up a little bit. So that's an option also if you like the look of the wood and want that more exposed. And you could use a thinner ribbon on either side of the image to just finish off the edges. That's also a possibility. But I really liked this ribbon with the colors that were in the image. So I opted to go this route. Lots of different things that you can do with this. And I hope that you'll always take my projects as inspiration and not necessarily that you have to do it the way that I do it. Use the colors that make you happy. Use the style bows that make you happy. Use the finishing touches that make your heart happy, because that's what crafting is about, right? We do it because we love it and it makes us happy. And my dog is dreaming over next to me here. So I apologize if you can hear her making noises, because she's clearly in her dream barking at something and making little woofing sounds. So sorry about the background noise, guys. But I have gone into my stash and I'm pulling out some green jingle bells this time. And I'm going to glue down 3 of these on either side of the project just to finish it off and give it a little bit more interest, so to speak. I had considered doing some greenery on this one as well, but ultimately I'm really enjoying the jingle bells, and I've got kind of a theme going on now because I used them in a couple of the other projects, either for, I guess it was for stands on both of those. So I don't know, it was just something else to oh, you know what? This is the other one that I used more jingle bells on. Never mind, you guys. I'm trying to remember what I did. So I used them on the other stand, and then did I use jingle bells on anything else? I think it was just this one. Yeah, it was just this one. So here, but I am going to use, this is what I was thinking of. I'm going to use these for a stand as well. And because they were a little larger and I positioned them properly, these actually did work just fine for my stand. So I'm getting them lined up the way that I need them. I've got the little ridge on the jingle bell is going to be pointing down towards the table. And yeah, it's going to work just fine. So putting a nice generous glob of hot glue on either side there, setting the jingle bells down, propping this up in the way that it needs to go so that I make sure that it's leaning back on the jingle bells a little bit. Sorry about my head right in the middle of the screen there. I was trying to make sure that they were positioned where I needed them. I'm just going to hold them. There's my head again. Sorry. There's my head again. I don't know why that made me think of a song. I don't know. But yeah, now that they're nice and cool, just making sure that they're well positioned, and this one is done too. Let me know what you think. DIY number 23. All right, these are signs that I got already carved. I'm going to call them carved because it's lack of a better term, but from the Home Depot. They were on sale for $11.99 each. I grabbed one of each of them. They already have a sawtooth hanger on the back. I thought they were super cute, and they're ready to paint, except for some sanding that needs to be done. So they had routed, is that the right word? Out the letters, but there was some leftover little pieces of wood and debris. So I just took my sandpaper, sanded that all down. I was showing you the antique wax by Waverly. You could totally use that, but because I want to stain the wood and then go over the letters with paint, I was afraid that the wax would prevent the paint from adhering properly. So instead, I was showing you my Java chalk paint. It's just a chocolate brown color that I'm using a baby wipe with to use this as a stain. So just applying that to front and back to both sides, was showing you here my Adirondack white chalk paint by Home Decor, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint in the letters. Now I do have this sped up about 2.5 times, so I am doing my best to just take my time, and I'm using, for right now, a flat brush. I did end up using a couple of different sized brushes to be able to get into some of the areas that were a little bit tighter with some of the letters. So it takes time. That's really all this was taking my time, going over each of the little exposed wood areas. But let me know what you think.
Okay, everybody, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the projects, please remember to give me a big thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Let me know which one was your favorite. And until the next time, be well, be kind, and make it a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Take good care and Happy New Year.